to be here as well. I think he's actually the star of the show. Here he is. Tell me you're the star. Give a wave. Let's put some rings on these paws. Good to see you, Sharon, Margaret Zabinski, Yvonne. I did say hi to Paddy. Have you guys voted yet? So what I always find quite interesting in, well, I look like I've just woken up, which is what I just have done. Anyway, hopefully I'll look a little bit more alert, as you say in Afrikaans, wakker, a little bit later. What I find quite interesting with these polls is that usually, is that unfair to say? Usually it feels like you guys don't get the answer right. And if you'd asked me without doing the research, I probably wouldn't get it right either. So I see 14% say never. That's definitely not true. 17% say when he lived in Aal. That's, when did he visit brothels? He certainly visited brothels a lot in Aal. By the time he went to Aal, he was doing it pretty frequently, right? When he was 28, I see 44% of you voted for that. It's not a bad guess, but it's not, I don't think it's, I can't say for a fact, of course. I mean, I don't know the exact date that he went into a brothel the first time, but the let's say the evidence seems to support that he went when he was younger than that, because he makes a reference to that in a letter from 1875, right? And we'll sort of deal with that. I'll deal with that reference. So his first reference to going to a brothel, it's kind of indirect, but it's from 1875. And the reference he makes in 1881, he sort of says in a weird way, something like, I'm sure you've been doing this as well, kind of thing. In other words, he's referring to his younger brother, who's 4 years younger, that, I'm sure you kind of, what I'm talking about, kind of thing, which suggests that, he's kind of been at it for a while, kind of thing. And of course, that messes with our idea of this somewhat, like Van Gogh as this naive but good artist. You don't tend to think of him as like a bad boy or I don't know how one can put it, sleazy kind of guy. The syphilis side of him doesn't really kind of make it into the narrative, funnily enough. So no, I don't mean it I don't mean it in an insulting way at all, just that there are a lot of misconceptions about Van Gogh, and when you ask simple questions, it's interesting how those misconceptions come out. And somebody actually asked me recently, how do you know that Vincent got an inheritance and what it was? And I actually think about that. I was like, how do I know that? And I Googled it and I couldn't find anything. In fact, I went through these books that I've got here. I went through these books that I've got here, and it's not referred to at all in the books. I won't say it's not Googleable, because a lot of things are. You just got to know how to search, but I certainly couldn't find it online. I think I may have found something in Martin Bailey's book. I don't have it with me at the moment. My brother's got it. He actually texted me a few hours ago to say how much he's enjoying it, and he'll give it back to me on Sunday. But I seem to remember writing about it in The Murder of Vincent van Gogh. I'm not 100% sure how I know that, to be honest. I'm not sure if I got it from a documentary. Sometimes when you write a book, you eventually navigate your way to very obscure resources, and then you sort of later on you sort of wonder how you found it, kind of thing. Stephanie says, "Oh, that's nice. You and your brother have an interest in Van Gogh together." It is nice. I don't know whether my view is going to convince him, though. It seemed like that was happening when we spoke. So I'd like to see what he says once he's read Bailey's book. Then we'll see what he says. But I do get the sense that his knowledge on Van Gogh has suddenly taken a bit of a leap, and I think he considered himself an expert. So you remember I said to you when I mentioned to him I've got 4 books on Van Gogh, he said, "Yeah, I've probably got all of them." And I was like, "No, I don't think you've got any of them." And then it turned out he didn't have any of them. Okay, so I think the answer to the poll is the first one, when he was 22, which is pretty young. And so I think an interesting question to ask is, while he was studying to be a preacher, was he doing that? And I think it's an interesting question because it addresses this question of subtlety and complexity. When you watch the Johnny Depp case, everything is cut and dried, everything is very black and white, but people aren't actually that way. And so in terms of Vincent van Gogh, was he this cut and dried guy? Was he, totally, a pastor's son, and he was a very, very moral fellow? And the answer is no, that there was this ambiguity. And we're gonna really address this aspect in this episode. Paddy says, "Has he read your book?" No. In fact, I don't think he's read any of my books. Stephanie says, "My internet keeps buffering." Are the rest of you guys getting a clear signal? Yvonne says, "Has your brother read your book on Van Gogh?" No. Is reading the what's his name? Martin Bailey book. Paddy says, "Mine is okay." Sharon says, "Clear." Okay. Okay, so there are a couple of things I want to do. Timmy's sort of lying on this arm, so I kind of want to deal with some of these books. But what I want to start off with, just to kind of shock you guys, just to kind of give you guys a sense of that Van Gogh isn't just a cute artist. He's not just like kind of a sweet dude. He's a big hitter. I wanna fill you guys in with some contemporary art news. So there was an art auction about 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, and I'm going to take you guys through 15 of the most expensive artworks that have been sold very recently at this art auction. What is really, really interesting is the spectrum of art, or the sort of what's the word? The artists that make that list of 15 artists. So let me ask you guys a question. Do you think Van Gogh makes that list? This is of the 15 most expensive artworks that have been sold this year. Do you think Vincent van Gogh makes that list? let's see what you guys say. Stephanie says he gave up a lot of money and had little food, but had money for brothels. That's a really good point. Well, you're going to see that coming up big time in 1880, this year, or 1881. You're going to see the issue of money coming up in a big way. The money narrative is also a very interesting one. How much money Theo ultimately loaned him or gave him, it's quite a lot. And also how much, the whole money narrative is definitely a very interesting one. But this particular episode, we're going to deal more like with the love life narrative and kind of the sex narrative, if you will. I've kind of gone through the letters for this episode, and they're so long. They're not. They are, I guess, many. Not like a huge amount, but the thing is that each one is like so long. I don't know if we're going to get to the one I really want to get to, which is in December 1881. So as a result of that, I'm probably going to start off with the December letter, which is really long, and then go back to January. In other words, I want to show you that what is actually going on before you realize it's going on. So by the time he writes about it in a letter, it's already kind of been happening, right? I remember I also said you've got to wonder what he's doing in the Borinage, because he's like with very sort of ordinary blue-collar folk. And what do you think they do with their spare time? What do you think they do with their spare cash? What do you think, anyway, so one's kind of also got to wonder what's going on in the middle of all of this stuff. He's a very lonely guy. What's he doing when he's not writing letters, when he's had enough of writing letters, kind of thing. Yvonne says, just like people can't pay their bills, but can pay for cigarettes, drugs, and alcohol. Yvonne, when I was in my 20s, I wanted to go to England. I wanted to go overseas, and I kind of needed to make a lot of money quickly because I had to pay for you had to show a certain amount of money in your account in order to qualify for a visa in England. So I was working like two or three jobs, and then also did like a medical trial. I was like a guinea pig. But one of the jobs I did, which made quite an impression on me because it was a little bit unusual, but I worked in a caravan in a very poor area. It was like a snoopy. It's like a small little tuck shop, but it was in a very, very poor area. And what I really couldn't believe was how much money these very poor people spent on cigarettes. They'd often buy them one at a time. And it's called, in South Africa, it's called grandpa headache powder. It's like Disprin or aspirin, but it's in powder form, which I guess they were snorting. And they just spent a huge amount of money on things like grandpa headache powder and cigarettes. And then sort of second to that was Coca-Cola and a loaf of bread. You kind of got the idea that they had no money, but the little bit that they had, they were spending on cigarettes and kind of aspirin. So, yeah, that definitely is how it seems to work. The poor stay poor, sometimes for a reason. Okay, so the incredible thing with this art auction that happened in New York, I think it was 3 big auction houses. I'm just trying to think which ones they were. Another one's Christie's. Not quite sure what each of them were, but three auction houses. What is also incredible is despite the difficulty economically going on in the world, this actually set an all-time record. So the art sales this year in New York were the biggest, more than any season on record, right? So world record. Do any of you want to take a guess what the cumulative value was of the sales? So obviously we're talking about artworks worth in the millions of dollars. What do you think was the cumulative value of all of these art sales? Quite a tough question. Stephanie says, yes, if I don't give money to the homeless, I have small care packages in my car. Wow. Okay, so it's quite a difficult question, but I'll give you the answer. This recent art auction raised $2.8 billion, $2.8 billion from just the sale of art. 2.8 billion. Stephanie says 80 million. Okay, so I wish I could share with you guys the link, but it's behind a what do you call it? A paywall. I will put a link to it in the chat, but I mean, you can't really. I had to subscribe to it and pay for it to get this information. But it comes from ArtNet News, and I'm going to take you through the. I wish I could show you these images because they are quite amazing. I did post one of them on Patreon. So Christie's is the one auction house. Sotheby's is the other. I'm just trying to think what the third one is. Yeah, I just can't see what it is. Christie's, Sotheby's, and yeah, I don't know. I'm just trying to see if this is actually, if I'm actually able to read it off here. Is it going to allow me to log in? Thing is, I got this information off another computer, and now it's probably going to. Now I've got to reset my password just because I'm using a different computer. Sorry about this, guys. I did actually copy the text and email it to myself, but I see it's not done it properly. Please bear with me. I'll be with you in a moment. Reset password. So what I really want to do is take you guys through these 15 most expensive artworks this year. And then show you where the Van Gogh fits into that. Okay, at last. Sorry about that. Timmy, I think you must really sit down just because it's getting a little bit difficult to do this with you sitting on my lap. Okay. So let's see if I can bring this up now. Back to login. Sorry about this. Really frustrating when you go to all the effort to prepare and then I don't know, I'm not quite sure what happened here. Seems like something that I copied didn't copy properly. So, so these are the artworks in reverse order from the least expensive to the most expensive, right? So I'm going to give you the name of the artist. I wish you could see these artworks, but also more important, the price of the art. What I want you to pay attention to, and you can maybe kind of count it down. You can make a list if you like, but what I want you to pay attention to are artworks that are around about 100 years old or more. So remember that this could be any art. It could be art that's 5 years old, 10 years old, 20 years old. I want you to pay attention to the kind of date that most of the artworks sort of center around, which I think is quite fascinating. You know, if you had to just ask yourself today in 2022, what is the most valuable art in the world? Like from what time does it come from? What do you think the answer is to that? So let's go through this. 15th, Paul Cézanne. It's an artwork called The Glade. It sold for $41,688,000, $688,500 on May 17th in Sotheby's, right? $41.68 million. I'll see if I can, I don't know whether you'll be able to see this particular image. Let me know if you can see it. Can you guys see this? Are you able to see that image? If you can see that one, then I'll show you some of the others. Terry Dean, thanks for joining us. Can you guys see that image? Okay, cool. Okay, so that is a Cézanne, right? And that Cézanne comes from, it's dated 1895, right? Just to make a note of that date. So that is 5 years after Vincent van Gogh died, but very much in the time period of Vincent van Gogh. Does that make sense? Like, you know, very much in that time period. So, and also Cézanne was someone that Dr. Gachet knew, right? So that's 15th place. That's the cheapest of these artworks, sold for $41.6 million. Now we go to quite a different one. Emmanuel Letcher, Washington crossing the Delaware, obviously an American theme. It comes from 1851, which I think is the oldest artwork of the lot. This one sold for $45 million, also in Christie's, New York. So I'll put a link to that one. I think I quite like this artwork. I mean, it's definitely got an epic quality to it. So this is in 14th place. See if you can see that one. The date for this one is 1851. 1851. I think Stephanie's taking notes, right? So now we go to 13th place. Francis Bacon, Study of Red Pope, in 1962, second version, and this is dated 1971. This sold for $46.28 million in Sotheby's, New York. This was May 19th, so around about 2 weeks ago. To me, you'd have to pay me to actually hang this in my home. You'd have to pay me. But this is quite a relatively modern picture. When I say relatively modern, it's older than what I am, but by 1 year. But yeah, this is a relatively recent piece compared to the others. Right, so that's 13. Now we go to Mark Rothko with no title. It's untitled. You'd also have to pay me to hang this in my home. This sold for $48 million on May 16th, so also just about 2 weeks ago. This is also dated 1960, so relatively recent. So are you wondering, is there Van Gogh in this list? Where is it? And how much was it? And what is it? Let's see what it is. So now we go up to 11th place on this list, Pablo Picasso. This is from 1909, so going back over 100 years. It's called Tête de Femme, and it sold for $48.48 million from Christie's, New York on May 12th, so quite recently. I might be persuaded to just put that somewhere in my garden, but if it got stolen, I probably wouldn't miss it. So that's Pablo Picasso. It's a sculpture. It sold for over $48 million. Now we are in the top 10, right? Top 10 most expensive art that's been auctioned. This is a second Mark Rothko. You'd also have to pay me to put this in my house. This is just called number 1, and it's dated 1962. So also relatively modern artwork. If you say relatively modern is more than 50 years old. But this sold for $49.6 million, almost $50 million. And that sold in Christie's in New York on May 12th, so around about a month ago. So ask yourself whether you'd put this in your home. Good to see you, Bria. Bria says, I can't sleep and I've been listening for a few. Okay, well, hopefully I can put you to sleep, Bria. So now we're in the top 10. Now we go to number 9, and this is an image from Vincent van Gogh. And here's where I want to test your knowledge of Van Gogh. The picture is called Champs des Alpes. I really don't know how to pronounce it. Bria could probably do better. Champs des Alpes, 1889. I want you to look at this image and tell me where you think it was painted. And the big clue here, of course, is the date. So have a look at this. This image sold for over $50 million. So Vincent van Gogh is 9th out of the 15, and it sold for $51.9 million, so just under $52 million about 2 weeks ago. Yeah, the painting of the orange line sold for $49.6 million. So anyone know where that picture that Vincent van Gogh painted, where it actually is? Anyone know? Bria says, I'm all amped up now. Okay. Any thoughts? Anyone? So Bria says that's a beautiful painting. Yvonne, you're 100% right. She says it's near the asylum. It was obviously painted while he was at the asylum. I can tell you that the landscape he's painted there, I've mountain biked through, and it was a suffer-faced. You can actually see there's a kind of big mountain range in the background. I don't think that's clouds. I think that's mountains. And then he also, you can see it says De Alpils, which basically means it's like the Alps, but it's like a kind of a, I think it's like a kind of a reserve or a national park in, well, it's just outside Arles. It's just outside Arles. It's between Arles and the asylum of Saint-Remy, but it's definitely a very hilly area. So I've actually ridden through there. If you look at the bottom right of that image, there's a white object. I would be willing to suggest that could be a rock, and that rock might be a rock next to the side of the road. There were a couple of rocks by the side of the road when I cycled up there. I think I even leaned my bike up against one. So I think that's what that might be. So that's from 1889. So just again, bear in mind the date. We're going back 150 years in terms of art history. So 150-year-old art is making the top 15 most valuable artworks in the world right now, among those artworks. Okay, so now we go to number 8. And this is a Jackson Pollock. So Jackson Pollock just beats out Vincent van Gogh. And this is from 1949. And this sold for $54.2 million. And that was in New York on May 12th, the same day and the same auction house as where the Van Gogh one sold. Patty says, everything old is new again. Good point. Yvonne says, I love this one. It's new to me. I also like it. Robbie Robbins says, bottom right, is it a tent? No, I think it's a white rock. It's definitely not a tent, unless it's a tent for a hobbit. Okay, so now we go to number 7, and this is where it gets quite interesting. Claude Monet, 1907, so 17 years after Van Gogh's death. It is just called, it's called Nymphias, and it sold for $56.495 million, same day as these other two. So I'll put a link there to that one. Okay, so you can see there's a kind of a mixture of some artwork is just, how can I put it, a landscape or a particular scene, and something else is like nothing. It's just like lines and colors or something, right? Now we go, so that was Claude Monet, 1907, $56.495 million. Again, another artwork that's more than 100 years old. And now we go to number 6. It's also Claude Monet. Sorry about that. Also Claude Monet. From a year earlier, it's, I think, somewhere in Venice, and it sold for $56.6 million. But yeah, I think it's somewhere in Venice, but I could be wrong. So this is I think the second Claude Monet. I also like Monet a lot, I've got to say. So I wouldn't mind hanging that in my home. Like if someone said, would you like, I'd say, okay, it's fine, I'll take it. So now we get to, I think this is the third Mark Rothko. You'd also have to put a knife to my back to kind of get me to hang this in my home. This is called Shades of Red, and it's from 1961. This picture sold for $66.8 million. $66.8 million. Same day as all these others, Christie's, New York, May 12th, 2022. Now, compare what you've just seen there to the Monet. They couldn't be more different, right? Couldn't be more different. Robbie Robbins says, I've lost the sound. Well, the sound, I don't know, some of you can hear the sound apparently. Stephanie says, why? Okay, so now we're in the top 5. So we've now got 2 Mark Rothkos so far, 2 Claude Monets, and a Cézanne and a Van Gogh and a Pollock and a Picasso, right? And that's besides that other sort of historical artwork. So now we're in the top 5. Now let's go to number 4. The number 4 is a second Picasso. You'd have to pay me a lot of money to put this in my home. It's Femme nu couché. It's very famous, but I really don't like it at all. It's from 1932, so almost 100 years old. This cartoonish thing sold for $67.5 million in Sotheby's, New York, May 17th, so around about a month ago. Would you pay $67 million for that? Would you pay $67.5 million for that? Would you pay $67,000 for that? Okay, so that's top 4. So we've now got 2 Picassos, and now we're in the top 3. Now we're in the top 3. In third spot in this top 15 is Claude Monet. I think it's the third Monet now. Third Monet. And this Monet is Le Parlement Soleil Couchant. This sold for quite a lot, about almost 10 million more than the Picasso. This sold for $75.96 million in Christie's, New York on May 12th. Third Claude Monet. Yvonne says, I hate that one. But I'm not talking about the Monet, of course. Ricardo says, there's a Rothko chapel in Houston. His paintings carry no shadow and are very relaxing. So maybe good for sleep. Like if you've got sleep apnea, you hang it in your home. Okay, so this one you definitely wouldn't hang in your home if you had sleep apnea. Jean-Michel Basquiat, I'm not quite sure how to say it. Basquiat, untitled, fairly recent, from 1982. In fact, I would say this is the newest artwork. So it's about 40 years old. Again, you'd have to torture me to keep this in my home. It sold for $85 million, so 10 million more than the Monet. You would have to pay me and torture me to put this in my home. This was sold by the Phillips auction house. I'm not really familiar with them. On May 18th, 2022 for $85 million. Jean-Michel Basquiat, I think that's how you pronounce it. Okay, and number 1. What do you think the number 1 artwork is? And this sold for just under, you're not going to believe this, just under $200 million. So if the Basquiat that sold for 85 million didn't even reach 100 million, the one that was number 1 sold for almost 200 million, 5 million short of 200 million, right? I'm not even sure if it's art. I mean, I guess it is art, but it kind of looks like a photo of Marilyn Monroe that someone just colored in. So look at the variety of art in the top 15. There's some things that are pleasant and where you'd say that is a pleasant scene, and then there are others that are literally stomach-turningly bad and ugly, and then there's some that are just completely bland. Well, that is the how fickle the art market is. It isn't Dr. Gachet. So Andy Warhol's Shot Sage Blue Marilyn from 1964, also relatively new art, but still more than 50 years old. That sold for just under $200 million. So I think what you can appreciate with this is all of these 15 artworks are kind of older than 40 years old. Like there's nothing from the last year or 5 years or 10 years or even 20 years or even 30 years. So, if you are an artist and you want to really be a big hitter, you kind of need to paint something very quickly and get in a time machine and hope that a couple of decades go by, because it seems like art needs time to marinate, kind of thing. So so Andy Warhol wins by country mile with an almost $200 million sale for an artwork that really looks like a photo that's kind of been colored in. That's what it looks like to me. I don't know whether he did actually, draw, sketch her out, or whether I don't know how he did that. But to me, it's not terribly creative. It's more derivative. So I just wanted to share that with you to show you where Vincent van Gogh fits in with these really big hitters. His artwork, just to remind you, was in 9th place on that list, so well in the middle, and sold for $51.9 million. Remember, Dr. Gachet sold for even more than that, I think, for 30 years ago. So it gives you an idea just how expensive the portrait of Dr. Gachet actually was. If you took the portrait of Dr. Gachet into this list, I think it would have come close to second, which is quite an achievement. Welcome, Tommy. Good to have you here. So what I want to do is, as a way of introducing you to the topic that we're going to deal with today, I want to take you into this book. This is the sort of parsonage in Newnan. I've actually been to that house. I've been outside the house and around the house. But that's the big home that the Van Gogh family lived in Newnan. Now, they're not actually in Newnan right now. They're in Etten, and they are going to move to Newnan ultimately. What I want to just do is read two or three paragraphs here just to give you the context for where we are in our story, right? This is from page 20 of The Making of an Artist. In October 1880, Van Gogh went to Brussels to start on his training in art. He matriculated at the academy. Then he said the following: "Once I've mastered drawing or watercolors or etching, I can return to mining and weaving country and shall be better at working from nature than I am now. But first I have to acquire an amount of skill." That's from letter 137. A model student, he copied pictures and practiced drawing exercises. He suppressed the irresistible urge to go out into nature, and he even sent his works home to Pa so that he can see I'm doing something. That's from letter 138. Anton Mauve, his mother's brother-in-law and one of the best-known Dutch painters of the day, helped Vincent, introducing him to ways of handling paint and giving him essential advice. Something just to bear in mind is Vincent's mother was actually quite wealthy. She was from quite a wealthy family. And so Anton Mauve was his mother's brother-in-law. So his mother's sister's husband, I guess, and one of the best-known Dutch painters of the day. And so this guy kind of took Vincent under his wing. He was one of a couple. The other one was Van Rappard. And so he gave him advice. Van Gogh believed he had now discovered his true vocation, and I guess he kind of had. A path which might in due course earn him honor and financial rewards, and his family and relatives, tradition-minded as they were, approved. Now, what I want you to just think about is the irony of the struggles you're going to hear about, the lovelorn struggles you're going to hear about. You must bear in mind, I think part of the reason why Van Gogh's girlfriends rejected him, or why he had trouble, was because he was regarded as kind of a no-hoper. He didn't have money, he didn't have prospects. And so look where we are now, where his art is selling for $51 million 150 years later. And so one wonders if he could say, but my art's going to sell for 150 million, sorry, for 50 million in 150 years. But really, believe me, do you think that's going to make a difference? Do you think that's going to make a difference to what his girlfriends think of him? Anyway, so he says, so it says here, in April 1881, that's the time frame we're going into, which is 1881. In April 1881, Vincent went to Etten, to his parents' home, where Theodorus van Gogh was now the incumbent of the parish. And now that everything seemed to be working out, he was welcomed with open arms. So now that Van Gogh was like, at last, I know what I want to do. I want to be an artist. He was sort of welcomed home. Welcome home, son. Let's get you started. But then listen to this. 6 months later, Vincent was thrown out of the house, and the Reverend Van Gogh seemingly even decided to disown his son. So he's welcomed with open arms. 6 months later, thrown out the house, and I want to disown you. You know, you're not going to inherit anything. Vincent was in love. The lady in question was no other than his cousin Key, recently widowed. She had a young son, and Vincent, with his weakness for children, soon acquired a passion for the boy's mother too. The entire family were embarrassed by his advances and found his protestations of love indecent, impious, and lacking in sensitivity towards a woman in mourning. Vincent freely expressed his emotions to Theo. This is from letter 157. He said, fall in love, and there you are. To your amazement, you notice that there's another force that impels us to action, feeling. And he felt that his new devotion had a positive influence on his art. He says, to my chagrin, there always remains an element of hardness and severity in my drawings. And I believe that she, that is to say her influence, is needed if they are to become softer. Key's influence would supposedly purify his art and endow it with the flexibility it needed for the vital confrontation with nature. Shall I carry on reading? Van Gogh had a twofold vision of his cousin as a prim and proper clergyman's daughter, rejecting his advances because the family elders expected her to do so, and as a woman he loved and intended to fight for. He projected everything he hated and loved into her. Key became a personification of conventions and freedom alike, of the academic form of establishment art and of the openness of nature, of the moral double standards of the middle class and of the immediacy of emotional life. It was in this connection that Van Gogh first mentioned the concept that all his artistic efforts were to be devoted to, and which art historians still identify him with. May your profession be a modern one, he urged Theo, and may you help your wife to attain a modern soul, free her of the awful prejudices that shackle her. Modernity and emancipation were already inseparable in Van Gogh's mind, and his emphatic calls for freedom were to be matched by the dazzling evolution of his art. So I'm not going to read any further. It does say he still had a long way to go, and you can see from this that he clearly did have a long way to go. These were the sort of artworks that he was producing in the 1880s. You can see how dark they were, right? Dark and somber. and he was just really starting to find his way, right? The thing I want to kind of emphasize just is the sort of turmoil he goes through. He goes home, everybody loves him, or it's like, in a way, a good setting, and then it turns sour really quickly because in the bosom of home, he feels comfortable enough to become familiar with people around him, and one of those people is Key Voss, and he's so comfortable that he starts to kind of make an advance on his cousin, and she's in mourning, and he nevertheless falls head over heels for her, and everybody's very upset by that. But then he's not deterred. Despite disapproval, he persists regardless. Despite her saying no, he persists regardless. Wow, that doesn't make any sense. It says, I'm suddenly live again. Sorry about that long delay. I'm not really sure what that was all about. What do you guys think? Should I continue? Should we do this another time? Yvonne says, I'll check back intermittently. Well, there's still 9 of you here, so let me continue. I don't know what that was about. Looks like some kind of internet issue. My internet's paid up, so I'm not sure what the issue is. I did reset it, but yeah, that's definitely a first. So anyway, let's continue. I just need to open up my email again. But I'm going to take you through some of the really interesting letters from this particular period. Okay, so okay, so let's start with a quote from Vincent to Theo. It was written on the 23rd of December, 1881. That's really where we want to get to tonight. Tonight, my time, this afternoon, your time in America. But there's just so many letters and they're so long. I don't know if we're going to get to December, so we might only end up getting halfway through 1881. But anyway, in his letter to Theo, from the 23rd of December, 2 days before Christmas, he writes, "It's not the first time I couldn't resist that feeling of affection, particularly love and affection for those women whom the clergyman damns so and superciliously despise and condemn from the pulpit," right? So in 1881, he's saying it's not the first time I couldn't resist that feeling of affection, especially the affection for those women the clergyman damns so and superciliously despise. Who do you think he's talking about? I'll put this quote in chat so you guys can give it a read. It's a bit long. Okay, that just fits in. Who do you think he's referring to with that? Timmy, who do you think he's referring to? How's that face? So I think he's referring to the woman of the night, the oldest profession, and that's also the view of quite a few scholars, right? And so the fact that he's saying, I couldn't resist that feeling, and it's not the first time, suggests that obviously he's not resisted that feeling in the past, right? So that's why I say in 1881, it's not the first time that he's kind of given in to this impulse when he was 28 years old. But he does refer to it again 6 years earlier. We're going to get to that letter in a moment. So just to go back to the poll, almost half of you say when he was 22, so he was going to brothels when he was 22. Well, what's really important to bear in mind there is, where was he when he was 22? Well, he was in Paris. Where was he in Paris? in Montmartre, right? And I've been there. I mean, I went there from when I was in Orvez. I went there to find the house that he lived in, and there are even sort of, what's the word, sex shows, and I'm not quite sure what. I didn't spend too much time there, but that aspect is still in that neighborhood today. In fact, I remember when I walked, I went to the blue door that's the entrance to where Van Gogh lived in Paris, in that suburb. On my way out of the suburb, I think I remember quite an old dude approaching me and asking me if I was interested in nookie nookie kind of thing, not with him, with someone he was like, yes, a pimp. And so that's to what extent it's still in evidence in Paris today. I think it was quite a big thing in Van Gogh's day. So he was living there, and that was obviously something that was going on, besides other things, cabaret and whatnot. So definitely quite interesting. Stephanie says, "Oh, you back." Yeah, sorry about that. Not quite sure what that was all about. Yvonne, good to see you've checked back in. So, yeah, so what do you guys think when he says, "It's not the first time I couldn't resist that feeling of affection"? It's kind of a euphemism, isn't it? I mean, is that really the feeling he's feeling, a feeling of affection, particularly love and affection for those women whom the clergyman damns so and superciliously despise? Who do you think he's talking about? So another thing that I want to put in chat, it's from the History Channel, so you will be able to access this particular link. It's not behind a paywall. Yeah, he gave into lust. That is that's the simple truth there of what he's talking about. He doesn't say it in those words, but that's exactly what it is. So this is from an article on the History Channel, and it's titled 7 Things You May Not Know About Vincent van Gogh, and hopefully you guys know most of these 7 things. He failed at multiple jobs before becoming an artist. And I just want to read this one because it deals with where we are in terms of the context again. The son of a minister, Van Gogh started working at 16 years of age. His uncle got him a job as a trainee with an art dealership. He went on to do stints in the firm's London and Paris offices before he was fired in 1876, right? Afterward, he worked briefly as a school teacher in England and then at a bookstore back in the Netherlands. In 1878, he went to the Borinage, a mining district in Belgium, and worked among the poor as a lay preacher. He gave away his belongings and slept on floors. But after less than a year on the job, the religious organization sponsoring him decided he wasn't cut out to be a pastor and dismissed him. His next career choice obviously was an artist. Then it says his art career, that's number 2, his art career was relatively brief. It says when his attempt to become a preacher didn't work out, Van Gogh, who'd sketched local miners and peasants while living in Belgium, decided in 1880 to focus on art. In 1881, this is the year that we want to deal with, the Dutchman, who was primarily a self-taught artist, returned home to the Netherlands, where he devoted himself to drawing and painting. His younger brother Theo, an art dealer, helped support him financially and emotionally. Obviously, his parents did too. In 1886, he went to live with Theo in Paris. And those were pivotal years going to Paris. So what we really are trying to get from now and to now is Vincent van Gogh. He's decided to become an artist. He's now moved back home with his parents. And it's going to take him 6 years from this point, 5-6 years, to get from where he is to Paris, which is when his art oeuvre is going to sort of take off, right? Basically, for the entire time he's in the Netherlands, he's going to learn skill, he's going to learn this and that. He's not really going to find his real calling as an artist. He's only going to find that when he's in Paris with other artists. But he's starting to get a little bit of momentum in the Netherlands, right? I just want to make sure you guys know where we are in the narrative, because it's easy to get lost in all these letters. Then number 3, scholars have questioned whether he cut off his own ear, just for interest's sake. Number 4, he produced some of his most famous paintings while in a mental asylum. You've just seen one of those. It was one of those that was in the auction a couple of weeks ago that sold for 51 million. He produced that when he was in this mental asylum. And number 5, he never married or had children. And I want to read that to you guys in a second. Number 6, there's been speculation that his death wasn't a suicide. I think you guys know that. And then number 7, Van Gogh's sister-in-law, that's Jo, played a role in his posthumous fame. So I want to read about he never married or had children. That's really the main thrust from this article. So it says here, Van Gogh was unlucky in love. In the early 1880s, that's exactly where we are now, when he was starting out as an artist and living with his parents in the Netherlands, he fell in love with his widowed cousin, Gogh Vos. Although she rejected him, he didn't give up easily, which led to tensions with his parents, who also weren't thrilled with his new choice of career. Next, he became involved with a woman named Sien Hoornik, a former prostitute who served as his model and also had young children. Van Gogh's family disapproved of Hoornik, and the relationship eventually ended. Later, while still residing in the Netherlands, he had a relationship with an older neighbor, Margot Begeman, who attempted to kill herself because her family opposed the match. So she obviously loved him a lot. In Paris, Van Gogh got involved with an artist, model, and cafe owner named Agostina Segatori. She sounds Italian, but that romance fell apart as well. The thing that I want to kind of impress upon you is, what do you guys think in retrospect? And what do you think Vincent's parents may have thought in retrospect? Meaning they, because of their piety, because of their position as respectable members of the community, because of his father's position as a priest, do you think that do you think it was ultimately the best decision to prevent his relationship with Gogh Vos, right? Do you think that that was a good call from his family? What do you guys think about that? Seems like Stephanie is the only one who's Stephanie puts up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 ticks. Okay, that's good. So Stephanie, since you're so active in chat, let me ask you, do you think it was the right decision to tell Vincent, no, you can't see Gogh Vos? Do you think that that was the best thing? I'm not sure if that's Yvonne's response. She says not really. What do you guys think? So again, do you think his family's position, the resistance around him being in love with Gogh Vos, his cousin, do you think that that was ultimately the right decision? It was his cousin. Stephanie says yes. Yvonne says it should have been up to Vincent and Gogh. It's a good point. Definitely a good point. Stephanie says, I understand it. Patty says the parents' opinion was irrelevant since Gogh Vos wanted nothing to do with him. Yes and no. You must remember Gogh's father was also, I think, a clergyman. And the society then, remember this is, 150 plus years ago, was very much you kind of did as you were told. It was a very kind of traditional society. the average person was kind of went to church, I guess. It's very different to the secular society of today, more secular society certainly than then. Ricardo Ortiz says no. So this is my view, my opinion. Is just, it's not necessarily that they were wrong, but if that relationship had worked out, just bear in mind the relationship that followed. The relationship that followed Kivos was that Vincent kind of shacked up with the pregnant prostitute, right? And she ultimately committed suicide, I think 20 years after he died. But also he would go on to have a relationship with his neighbor, and she threatened to commit suicide. So you really had some pretty awful, it's not like they just ended unhappily or tragically, they ended kind of horribly. It was a very sort of fraught thing that was going on. It wasn't like this just harmless love affairs kind of thing. He really had a miserable love life kind of thing. Stephanie says, I think Vincent likely became heightened interested in her since they didn't support it. Maybe. Ricardo Ortiz says, why suspect the worst? I had puppy love for my cousin. I also had pretty strong feelings for one of my cousins when I was a teenager. But the point I'm just trying to make is that he went from bad, if that's bad, to really a lot worse. So he went from Kivos to a pregnant prostitute. In a way, it's hard to do worse than that. If you follow my follow where I'm going with that. Like if he wanted to offend or upset his family or the pious people around, it would be hard to do worse than shaking up with a pregnant prostitute. It's not even his child, kind of thing. There would also be another incident where one of his models would become pregnant, and then there were rumors that it was his child. So things were really going out of whack in that sense. Yeah, as Paddy says, out of the frying pan into the fire. The other part that I want to kind of emphasize is you've followed with me, you've followed the narratives of his letters, right? Through the 1870s, 1877, 78, 79, and you saw the religious fervor, you saw the tremendous, just the way that his letters were absolutely chock full of sort of biblical admonitions, and he was telling his brother, you must only eat bread. And then look at how his life swings almost in the opposite direction. He goes from being this pretty well-behaved, seems like a very ardent, sweet, well-meaning young man, to, and I'm not saying it is necessarily completely different. I'm not saying he's evil or he's bad. I'm just saying that he explores a different part of himself that is very different to that. It's not respectable, for the lack of a better word. So he starts out in life as a very respectable young man. He's an art dealer. He's earning a good salary and all that kind of thing. And then he ends up almost the opposite of respectable. Does that make sense? So I'm not saying he isn't respectable, just that the optics of it certainly don't look terribly good, do they? Yvonne says, and just think, if Vincent would have been able to settle with someone, he may not have ever gone to Orvez and lost his life so young. The other thing that is really interesting is he says himself that his art achieves a softer tone. There's a different dimension to his art when he's feeling in love. And I've noticed the same thing in my work. your private life can have an impact on the sense of compassion, the sense of insight, the sense of understanding, or indeed the opposite to that, your sense of being hard, your sense of being merciless, your sense of having contempt, or whatever. That can definitely have an impact on your perspective, your emotional state, maybe a feeling of resentment that you kind of having. But I think one of the most important things is having a woman in your life can theoretically settle an artist and help refine his focus. He's eating healthily, he's sleeping healthily, he's in some respects happy, and in other respects he's supported in his efforts, right? In other words, the right wife for an artist can get him where he needs to go. So that's just kind of an interesting aspect to it. Ricardo says selfishness, a big lifestyle change, definitely. Okay, so I want to get to the letters. I just want to look at what I prepared here. So he also wrote the following in 1887 to his sister Wilhelmine from Paris. He wrote, "For my part, I still continually have the most impossible and highly unsuitable love affairs from which, as a rule, I emerge only with shame and disgrace." So he's aware of that. It's not like he isn't self-aware. It's not like he's engaging in these encounters without realizing what's happening. He seems like an absolute fool for love. He seems like a very naive person in the social sense. And again, this is why you need to take this knowledge about Van Gogh, which is not often spoken about, and apply it to the situation at the end of his life in Auvers with Dr. Gachet, but more specifically with his 21-year-old daughter. He has often gotten himself into very bad, unsuitable, what's the word? If you don't recommend it, unpleasant in a way, romantic debacles, right? And so the fact that he's done it over and over again is kind of proof, or it's evidence, or it suggests that why would he not have done it in Auvers, right? Let me read this again. This is written 6 years later to his own sister, and it's written from Paris in October 1887. And he writes, "For my part, I still continually have the most impossible and highly unsuitable love affairs from which, as a rule, I emerge only with shame and disgrace." Didn't he emerge with shame and disgrace from something that didn't work out with Marguerite Gachet? Isn't that how he got shot? Does that make sense? So you may not know about this, but he was in love with someone called Caroline Haneberg as early as 1872. Eugenie Lawyer. These are not necessarily women who returned his affections, but women that he loved or was infatuated with. So Caroline Haneberg in 1872, Eugenie Lawyer, that's Loyer, that's a English lass, 1873, the year after that. And then 8 years after that, Kiva Stricker in 1881, that's the year that we're dealing with here. All three of these women turned him down. So he's looking for love, but the people that he really has his heart set on aren't interested in him. And so what does he do with that? So you can tell that he feels very rejected, and that rejection has that feeling of being rejected has a consequence. He feels resentful of society in a way. He doesn't want a conventional job in a way, So you must remember Vincent was raised in a middle-class home, and he basically, over time, and this is from the Van Gogh Museum dealing with this particular subject, they say that, over time he started to separate women into two categories: ladies that were from his own class, which were viewed as higher beings by society. So he saw ladies as the higher beings and those from his own class. I'm just saying he recognized that those sort of ladies existed, but he actually felt more of a connection, and he felt pity towards the socially disadvantaged women such as prostitutes. And not only that, I think he felt, well, the women of his class rejected him, whereas the women of this other class accepted him. And that's why I think he kind of had this attraction for the old Dickensian thing. That was part of the attraction. The other thing is that the thing that he was trying to draw, the Dickensian tone and themes that he wanted to draw, were often captured by these destitute women rather than the other woman, kind of thing. But I think one's also got to ask, if he was lying naked next to a prostitute, could he really talk to them about Monet? Could he really talk to them about Daubigny? Could he really talk to them about Rembrandt, right? So although that part of his life was maybe to some extent satisfied, who he really was a kind of a kid from a middle class upbringing, and he couldn't find people in that class wouldn't accept him. So you can see he was sort of trapped between two worlds. Does that make sense? Paddy says Vincent loved not wisely but too well. Impulses. I also want to be just quite clear to say we can look at this and laugh, and we can look at this and be amused, and we can look at this and find it, sort of a certain amount of probative value. But as a result of let's just say these difficulties, these frustrations, Van Gogh ended up with syphilis. I don't know whether you can make the argument that if he found love early on that he wouldn't have, but I certainly think that that's to some extent a sensible argument. You can counter that argument to say that he wouldn't have gotten syphilis if he met someone and it was great or whatever, by saying, well, what about Theo? Theo had syphilis, and Theo seemed to be a upstanding citizen. He was an art dealer, and he married a really a really kind, genuine, sweet woman. So that didn't stop him from getting syphilis. It didn't stop him from going to brothels either. So would it have had an impact, right? Yvonne says, makes sense, but sad he couldn't launch with those of his class. Stephanie says, no, he didn't have a companion that met all his needs. Okay, so I want to get to the next letter. So let me ask you guys, bearing in mind we've sort of missed, there was that break because of the internet. Do you guys want me to go through 1881 from the beginning, letter by letter by letter, or do you guys want me to sort of jump a little bit ahead? Paddy says, didn't Dr. Gachet's wife die of syphilis? As far as I know, that she did, yes, as far as I know. That's right, Yvonne. Okay, so Stephanie, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with, first of all, a quote from the 7th of November, 1881. So we need to actually start in early 1881. But I just want to give an idea where all of this is going. This is what he writes to Theo from Eton on a Monday, 7th of November, 1881. He writes, and just take note of how this sounds like a totally different side to Vincent van Gogh. It's like a totally different animal to the Vincent van Gogh we know. Listen to this. He says, I've acquired a great appetite for life, and I'm very glad that I love. My life and my love are one, but you're confronted with a no, nay, never. You draw to my attention. Obviously, this is within the Kivos affair. Then I say that old boy, for the time being, I regard that nay, no, no, nay, never as a piece of ice that I press to my heart to thaw, deciding who will win, the coldness of that piece of ice or my warmth of life. That's a delicate matter on which I'd rather not comment as yet. And I wish that others would also keep quiet about it. They have nothing better to say than unthawable, madness, and such loving innuendos. If I were faced with an iceberg from Greenland or Nova Zembla, I don't know how many meters high, thick, and wide, then it would certainly be a critical case if one stood in front of it and wanted to embrace the aforementioned ice colossus and press it to one's heart and thought. So there's kind of some hyperbole here. It's quite funny in a way. He's basically saying, it's not like, even if Kivos is like a block of ice, him pressing himself physically against her isn't really going to be a huge threat to him. It's like he's saying, what's the worst that could happen? He's saying it could be far worse. It could be a huge block of ice, like a colossal mountain of ice, like from Greenland. And if I had to press my chest against that, then something really bad could happen, kind of thing. And he's kind of saying people are overreacting. Just why can't you just let me have what I want, kind of thing. And they're saying it's madness. She's unthawable, and so on. Then he says, but considering that as yet I haven't noticed an ice colossus of such dimensions in my sea lane, considering, I say, she isn't many meters tall, thick and wide, even with no, nay, never and all, and if I've measured correctly, isn't unembraceable. So he's saying, even though she's like an ice kind of pillar, he can nevertheless embrace her. He's saying even though she's like a block of ice, she's nevertheless, in terms of her dimensions, small enough that he can kind of put his arm around her. And so he's saying, if I've measured correctly, she's embraceable. He says, I can't yet appreciate the senselessness of my course of action. It's kind of quite funny in a tragic way. He's saying, everyone's telling him he's mad, and he's saying, I don't understand. I don't understand what's mad about this. He says, I can't appreciate the senselessness of my course of action. So as for me, I'm pressing that piece of no, nay, never ice to my heart. I don't know what else to do. And if I want to try and hold out until it disappears and thaws, who's to object? He's saying, what's the problem? If I'm going to make a mistake, that's my mistake, kind of thing. Then he says, tell me, Theo, do you think it very tactful of people to pay her a compliment because her nay, no, nay, never is unmeltable, unthawable, and irrevocable? And yet many do just that, in my opinion, by making such a fuss about that no, nay, never. It's almost like he's saying, the fact that she's saying no, and everyone's like, yes, no, you cannot do this. They're saying that's paying her a compliment. It's like they, in a way, supporting her. You can never have anything with this guy. They're saying that's actually kind of elevating her to be even more important. And he's saying, why are they objecting? What's the big deal? Then he says, wouldn't it be more humane of these people if they were willing and able just to smile about it? He says, I find it very sad indeed that there are so many who feel so strongly about it, but even so, I'm not planning to grow despondent about it or to let go of the courage I've plucked up. God forbid. Then he says, let those who wish be despondent. I've had enough of it and don't want to be other than happy as a lark in spring. So you really get the sense that his lust and whatever, his feelings have totally gotten the better of him, and he's loving recklessly, and he doesn't care what people think. And in a way, it's quite refreshing to see. It's refreshing to see this side of him that's jumping into life compared to the one that was sort of reading sermons all day from dusk till dawn, like on Sundays, It's kind of refreshing to see this side of him, but it's also kind of the pendulum swinging way in the other direction, right? And that's the kind of person he is. He can be very disciplined and very reckless. He can be very focused, and he can be very whatever you call someone who, indulgent. He can be very indulgent. He can be very sober and serious, and he can be very intoxicated. That's Vincent van Gogh, these two extremes. He can be very like an artistic genius and a very intelligent fellow, and he can be very foolish. You need to take all of that into Auver's and into his situation with Dr. Gachet and Marguerite and all that kind of thing. Suzanne B, thanks a lot for that. Susan B. Yeah, from one extreme to the other. Yvonne says you got to love his willing spirit. The thing that's quite interesting about him is Kivos rejected him. Even the prostitute that he lived with basically was like, dude, it's a bit much. She actually dumped him. So even a pregnant prostitute was like, no, kind of thing, right? But that's not to say not a single woman ever fell in love with him, because the neighbor did. His neighbor did fall in love with him, and to such an extent that she threatened to commit suicide if it wasn't allowed. So at least one person fell desperately in love with him. Ironically, although he liked her, he wasn't terribly in love with her. So the one woman that did return his affection, he didn't feel particularly strongly about, ironically enough. It often seems to work that way, doesn't it? Ricardo Ortiz says, definitely when Vincent writes letters to hear himself think out loud, wonder if Theo answered these masterpieces. No, I think he definitely did. Okay, so Timmy, can I put you down? I feel like I've kind of got a bit of a stomach ache. Let me just turn my chair. Guys, I don't know if I'm going to make the 3-hour mark that I normally make. I really don't think I'm going to make it this time, but let's see how far we can get. So I know it feels a bit haphazard, but I've been trying to just emphasize the point, and it may get lost in all of these letters, that he's moving towards, obviously this is the period where he's an artist, but at the same time, it's allowing him to express his feelings. So the whole thing with art, where he's expressing his true feelings on canvas about what he's seeing around him, it's also allowing him to access, in a way, his feelings for people around him. And within the family cocoon, there's a little bit of humanity creeping back into him. He's not this he's not like on a mission to work really, really hard. He's not like slaving after something. Now the real Vincent van Gogh's coming out in sort of warts and all. The Vincent van Gogh that is a feeling person, and also the Vincent van Gogh that's a thinking person, and the thinking and feeling together. And that's going to create quite a few problems for him. And really where he needs to be is in a community of artists, which is Paris. So he's going to spend 6 years of his life kind of struggling through essentially the opprobrium and disapproval and contempt and prejudice of basically family members. And then he will eventually cut loose of that by going to Theo. Part of that will be the death of his father. So that is something that's also waiting for him kind of in the near future. In fact, it's really about 4 years away. And the death of his father will also, how can I put it, weaken the glue that's holding him to his family. He's also going to be very hurt by his father kind of turning against him, also his mother turning against him. Obviously, they're also going to be hurt by what feels like a kid that is turning their life upside down. Remember, they are church people, and this guy seems to be doing everything he can to bring shame and disgrace on them, right? And so it's kind of this weird thing that's taking place. So I'm going to deal with this letter from mid-September 1881, and then I'm going to jump right back to the beginning of 1881 and see how far we get, okay? I just want to see how long this letter is. So one thing just to mention is that there are quite a few sketches that are part of the correspondence in 1881. They're better than the sketches of 1880, not by a lot, but certainly they are an improvement. I did put a lot of those sketches in the posts on Patreon so that you guys could see them. Maybe I can share a couple with you guys. So these are some of the sketches that accompany his letters from 1881. Just gives you a bit of an idea of what he's drawing. You can still see he's very young and very raw and rough as an artist as well. But it's certainly better than some of those earlier ones that I showed you in the previous one, in the previous live. This is, I think, after Malay again, copy image address. You can see he's still got a long way to go as an artist. Yeah, Yvonne says you need to do snacks and beverages on your desk for these 3 hours. I do have a glass of water, but anyway, we'll see. Okay, so let me read this letter. This is from Eton, mid-September 1881. So at this point, he's writing to his brother who's in Paris, and he's at home. He's living with his parents at this point. My dear Theo, even though I wrote to you only a short while ago, this time I have something more to say to you, namely that a change has come about in my drawing, both in my manner of doing it and in the result. Prompted as well by a thing or two that Mauve said to me. Remember, Mauve is his mother's brother-in-law, who's an artist, a very well-known Dutch artist. I've started working again from a live model. I've been able to get various people here to do it, fortunately, one being Piet Kaufman, the laborer. So that's the other aspect just to note is, as a art dealer, Vincent doesn't really meet, I guess, women that are going to find him interesting for whatever reason. As a teacher, he doesn't meet women that are going to find him interesting. As a, what else did he do? As a pastor, as a bookseller, whatever, all the things that he did, he didn't really have encounters with women that went anywhere, right? but that changes to some extent when he becomes an artist, where they sit in front of him, and some of them volunteer to sit in front of him, and others, I'm not saying they don't volunteer, but there's a situation where he has quite an intimate encounter with them. He sits and he can stare and he can draw them and he can talk to them and they can talk to him. And there's something flattering, I think, about being drawn. There's something flattering about an artist paying oodles of attention to you in one go, like all the time. And there's also there can be something sensual about it. I was a photographer when I was, like in my early days as a journalist, I was a photographer as well. I did quite a lot of the work that I did was photographing young women for their Facebook. So they would want like really good Facebook photos. Sometimes it was for modeling portfolios. Sometimes it was, I don't know, for whatever. And as a photographer, I definitely got to know quite a few people in quite an intimate way. They're smiling at you. They sometimes they're in various states of undress kind of thing. But you kind of get to know someone really, really well in a really short space of time. And the fact that you're paying attention to them isn't unwelcome. And there's sort of an interaction going on. It's like, how does this look? Or, turn that way or whatever. I'm just saying, when he was in the artistic phase, you can see how that could be more sociable for him, but also the encounters he had could also be more pleasant and more intimate than the sort of very, like it's almost a separation when you're a teacher or a preacher. There's a bit of a separation where you the student and I'm the teacher kind of thing. But when you're an artist, it's almost kind of on a similar level in a sense. There's not that sort of status difference necessarily. Anyway, it goes on to say, the careful study, the constant and repeated drawing of Barthes exercises has given me more insight into figure drawing. I've learned to measure and to see and to attempt the broad outlines, so that what used to seem to me to be desperately impossible is now gradually becoming possible, thank God. Now, part of what he's kind of forced to do, because he's trying to become an artist, he's got to start paying attention to the human forms. He's got to pay attention to shoulders, arms, fingers, the slope of a nose, chin, forehead, but also other things like bums, breasts, ankles, knees. But is definitely kind of being called to pay attention to shapes and to people. And that obviously awakens in him another part of himself, I guess. You're not just seeing a person as a, how can I put it, almost like a cardboard figure. You're not just seeing the outer cover. You're seeing everything. You're sort of seeing the fluidity of motion, and you're seeing and appreciating, I guess, the whole body, and seeing the body as something that the artist needs to, how can I put it, the artist needs to kind of absorb. That's how the body works. And you're no longer just seeing a person walking, you're seeing, you're trying to figure out how to draw that and what that is, how those shapes kind of work. And one of the very interesting but difficult challenges for an artist are eyes. Eyes tend to be, it's like the same thing in everybody you see, and yet there are subtle differences in one person's eyes and another. There's a subtle sign of happiness, sadness, something that's seductive, something that's tragic, something that's intelligent in one person's eyes compared to another. That's just the shape of the eyes. There's also the color of the eyes, also the way that eyes sparkle or whatever. Just saying that's just one dimension of when you're drawing people that an artist is going to be paying attention to. And you can imagine if you're an artist or you're the subject of an artist, and he says, well, you've got such beautiful eyes, and this person's like really looking at you. You can get that sense of being seen for the first time. And there is something quite seductive about that sometimes, where someone's looking at you from the eyes of an artist and they're seeing, they really paying attention to you in detail. And that can be quite a nice feeling. It's like you suddenly come alive in the world, in your world. You suddenly stand out in terms of your world, right? Let's just look at some of your comments. Okay, Stephanie's got that one. Stephanie, I'm actually reading from this one, but I'm going to go back to the one you're referring to. Stephanie says, eyes are the windows to the soul. Vincent van Gogh's eyes in his own self-portrait seem to be quite kind of sparkling and quite not attentive, but intelligent. Like there's a flickering intelligence in them. You seem to see it even in his self-portrait where his ear is missing. Okay, so let me just read through the rest. So he says, I've drawn a peasant with a spade no fewer than 5 times, a digger, in fact, in all kinds of poses, twice a sower, twice a girl with a broom, also a woman with a white cap who's peeling potatoes, and a shepherd leaning on his crook, and finally an old sick peasant sitting on a chair by the fireplace with his head in his hands and his elbows on his knees. And it won't stop there, of course. Once a couple of sheep have crossed the bridge, the whole flock follows. Diggers, sowers, ploughers, men and women, I must now draw constantly. So you're just getting a sense that at last he's getting really what he needs, which is he's socializing. He's paying attention to people kind of because he must, and he's paying attention to people in a way that draws him to them and literally draws them to him in a way. And this is really good for him. He needs to come out of his loneliness. He needs to come out of his isolation. And obviously he's going to be a happier person for that. He says, just as many others have done and are doing, I am no longer so powerless in the face of nature as I used to be. I brought Conte in wood and pencils as well from The Hague, and I'm now working a lot with it. I'm also starting to work with the brush and the stump, with a little sepia or Indian ink, and now and then with a bit of color. It's quite certain that the drawings I've been making lately don't much resemble anything I've made up until now. The size of the figures is more or less that of one of the exercises or Fuxian. As regards landscape, I maintain that that should by no means have to suffer on account of it. On the contrary, it will gain by it. Here with a couple of little sketches to give you an idea of them. Of course, I have to pay the people who pose. Now, this is where I can't remember who asked this. I think it was Stephanie. Stephanie said something like, where on earth, or was it Yvonne? You said, like, where on earth is he going to get the money to go to brothels or whatever? That certainly is a question in terms of when he was younger, but I think he did have a bit more money when he worked at Goupil, when he worked at Goupil in Paris, for example. Where does he get the money when he is an artist? Well, the answer is when he pays models, you can kind of imagine that he sort of pays them he's sort of getting 2 birds for 1 stone. He might say, can you come to my house to sleep with me? And then maybe he does, and then he paints them, or he paints them and then he sleeps with them or whatever. But it's still the same thing. But anyway, he says, of course I have to pay the people who pose, not very much, but because it's an everyday occurrence, it will be one more expense as long as I fail to sell any drawings. So he's talking about, what I need money to pay people to pose, and I I want to sell drawings eventually. Well, he never does, but he does keep painting people, doesn't he? He says, but because it's only rarely that a figure is a total failure, it seems to me that the cost of models will be completely recouped fairly soon already. So he's making the case here that he should be given money to pay for models to sit for him, right? Now, what I want you to think about is, what do you think he's really thinking? Do you think he's being completely honest about who he is and what he wants? Or do you think he's kind of being a little bit sneaky and a bit manipulative here? What he's saying is true, but isn't he not, is he really saying all there is to say? And so that's I don't mean it in an ugly way. He's not a criminal, but there is another side to Vincent van Gogh, just like there's another side to all of us. And this is this side. And he's kind of being a little bit sneaky in the way that he's trying to wangle getting more models. He's obviously enjoying it, and he wants to make sure that this keeps happening. So he says, it's an everyday occurrence. I'm going to need money to pay for these models. Then he says, and he's also kind of saying to his brother, I'm going to sell an artwork very soon. I need to learn how to draw these people, and as a result, I'm going to be making money very soon. So he's really pitching, what he's saying. Then he says, for there's also something to be earned in this day and age for someone who's learned to seize a figure and hold on to it until it stands firmly on the paper. I needn't tell you that I'm only sending you these sketches to give you an idea of the pose. I scribble them today quickly and see that the proportions leave much to be desired, certainly more so than in the actual drawings at any rate. He's saying the sketches that he sent aren't really that good. The actual sketches are much better. Not really sure if I believe that. Anyway, he says, I've had a good letter from Rappard, who seems to be hard at work. He sent me some very nice sketches of landscapes. I'd really like him to come here again for a few days. So I don't know do you get the sense that Vincent's being a little bit like kind of Wrigley and Weasley, like he's the same way that he's talking to Theo, you can kind of imagine he's talking to his own parents. He's sort of making excuses, he's asking for something, but he's actually got a kind of a little bit of a hidden agenda, right? Bear in mind, when a lot of these things happen, it catches his parents by surprise. I'm totally in love with Kivos, and you're just going to have to deal with it. Oh, okay. I'm in love with a neighbor. Oh, okay. You know what I mean? He's not completely honest about what's going on until it's a fait accompli kind of thing. Then he says, this is a field or stubble field which is being plowed and sown. I have a rather large sketch of it with a storm brewing. The other two sketches are poses of diggers. I hope to make several more. The other so as a basket. It would give me tremendous pleasure to have a woman pose with a seed basket in order to find that figure I showed you last spring. In short, the factory is in full swing, as Morv says. Remember that ingress paper, if you will, of the color of unbleached linen, the stronger kind if possible. In any case, write to me soon if you can, and accept a handshake in thought. Ever yours, Vincent. So do you get a sense that he's quite excited? He's like, seems to be quite happy and quite excited. So now I'm going to take you all the way back to January. And this is a letter from Vincent to Theo. Ricardo Ortiz, thanks very much. Thanks a lot for that. If it sort of is sort of not going anywhere, I might skip a couple of paragraphs, but I do want to take us through the full trajectory. I think 1881 is an important year, the year that he goes home, and then the year that he kind of finds himself attracted to Kivos. It would also be interesting to know, did he paint her portrait? Is that what formed the basis for all of this? Because you can imagine if He's painting portraits all the time, and he's painting strangers that a family member would say, I'll sit for you. And one of the people that did sit for him was Wilhelmine, his sister. So if his sister's sitting for him, why wouldn't his cousin? And if his cousin sat for him, maybe she didn't think much about it until it was too late. And if that's the case, again, couldn't that have been what happened with Marguerite Gachet? She sits for him, he falls in love with her, he develops this feeling, maybe she does as well, but maybe it's not as much, right? Stephanie says, maybe my feelings will change after hearing his letters regarding his cousin. Stephanie says he's not sharing all the benefits. I really want to get to the last letters he writes in December, but anyway, let's do our due diligence. Okay, from Vincent to Theo, Brussels, January 1881. There are not really a lot of letters. They're like 2 or 3 a month, but the thing is, a lot of them are long letters. My dear Theo, you will quite forgive me when you know that I wrote my last letter in a moment of spleen. My drawings went all wrong, and not knowing what to do, I began to write. I certainly ought to have waited for a better moment, and this will show you that I myself undoubtedly belong to that class of people of which I spoke in my last letter, namely that class of people who do not always reflect on what they say or do. This being so, let us drop it. I can tell you one thing, during these last days there's been a change for the better. I've finished at least a dozen drawings, or rather sketches in pencil and in pen and ink, which seem to me to be somewhat better. They vaguely resemble certain drawings by Lancon or certain English wood engravings, but as yet they are more clumsy and awkward. They represent a porter, a miner, a snow shoveler, a walk in the snow, old woman, a type of old man. I'm sending you 2 small ones. So even as early as January, he's just drawing people. And you can tell that this phase of his life, he becomes kind of, he's in a good mood, he's in a happier place, he sounds like quite motivated. And it's because he's not as lonely as he's been. Mixing with people is making him a happier person. Then he says, I have a model almost every day, an old porter or some working man or some boy who poses for me. Next Sunday, perhaps 1 or 2 soldiers will sit for me. Because now I am no longer in a bad humor, I have quite a different and better opinion of you and of the world in general. Right? I'm just going to put that statement in chat. This is how his art is actually changing him as a person. It's putting him in a good mood. And he says he's got a better opinion of his brother and also of the world. He says, also I have again drawn a landscape, a heath, a thing I had not done for a long time. I love landscapes very much, but I love 10 times more those studies from life, sometimes of startling realism, which have been drawn so masterfully by Gavarni, Henry Monnier, Dumier, Delemu, and mentions a few more. And then he says, now, without in the least pretending to compare myself to those artists, still, by continuing to draw those types of working people, I hope to arrive at the point of being able to illustrate papers and books, especially when I'm able to take more models, also female models. I shall make more progress. I feel it and I know it. I shall also probably learn to make portraits, but the condition is to work hard, not a day without a line, as Gavani said. So it is understood that for the present I shall stay here till you perhaps find something better for me. Only write me now and then. I am for the moment busy drawing for the third time, all the exercises au Fusain by Gogh. You told me of a change in the staff of the house Goupil and Key, and also of another change in your own position. I congratulate you. And as to those gentlemen, Goupil and Key, I'm inclined to believe that they are to be congratulated on having got rid of some of the staff. It seems like at the same time they fired some people. I think Theo got promoted, if I understand that right. He says, I've always thought that those gentlemen themselves were animated by a superior, nobler spirit, than that of those who have now left. Perhaps the position the latter have occupied so long in the firm, the influence and domination which Messieurs Goupil and Key put up with, were repugnant to some of the other employees, whom the company would perhaps have done better to retain, but who were so driven to extremes that they resigned. As you vaguely spoke to me some time ago about coming to Paris, I must tell you that I wish no better than to go someday soon. Perhaps I was sure of finding some work there, which would give me a salary of at least 100 francs a month. I must also tell you that as I've begun to draw, I do not intend to drop it. So I will try chiefly to get on in that line. Not only does drawing figures and scenes from life demand a knowledge of the technique of drawing, but it also demands profound studies of literature, physiognomy, etc., which are difficult to acquire. Enough for today. Write me when you have a moment to spare, and believe me, with a handshake, yours sincerely, Vincent. 72 Boulevard du Midi. And obviously at this point, he's not quite moved home, but he's about to. So we also want to get a sense of how things change once he arrives home. Something to note here is that he's talking about, I really want to go to Paris, but I first want to get a job. Well, he ends up going to Paris 6 years later, and he still doesn't have a job, and he still hasn't sold any paintings. So although he needs to get an art education, and he does, nothing really changes much between him not going to Paris now and when he goes to Paris when he eventually does. I think maybe the biggest change is that by then his father has died, and he sort of has, I think, some inheritance that, and also Theo does as well, that may have played a role. Now we go to January 1881, letter from Vincent to Theo. What's also quite interesting in 1881 is we get some of the first letters from Vincent to other artists like Rapard, I think, and also Mauve. And I don't really want to skip through those. You know, how are his letters to these artists, these fellow artists, different to his brother, right? Anyway, so he greets his brother with a French greeting, and then he says, "I've not heard from you for so long," meaning not for several months, nor even had the slightest answer to my last letter. Perhaps it will not be out of place to ask you for some sign of life. So he's writing to his brother again in January and wanting a response. Now, bear in mind, not that long ago, they were actually estranged, and he hadn't written to his brother for months. Anyway, he says, "I must say it seems rather strange and rather unaccountable that you have not written me since the one letter I received on my arrival here. Not to write is good, but to write seasonably is not bad either. In some cases, it is even much better." So you can see Vincent's quite a pushy, persistent person. He's not being pushy in an impolite way here, but he's nevertheless, he's an intense fellow kind of thing. He's a communicative fellow as well. He says, "In thinking of you, I unconsciously said to myself, why doesn't he write? If he's afraid of compromising himself in the eyes of Messieurs Goupil and Key by keeping in touch with me, is his position with those gentlemen so shaky and unstable that he's obliged to be so careful? Or is it that he's afraid I will ask him for money? But if this was the reason for your silence, you might at least have waited until I tried to squeeze something out of you, as the saying goes." So he's kind of almost putting himself in his brother's shoes and saying, the reason you're not writing to me is because of this, or could it be that, or could it be that, or could it be that? He's kind of having a conversation with himself. He says, "However, I will not prolong this letter necessarily by enumerating a lot of things which occasionally pass through my head when I think of the reasons you may have had for not writing. I have been drawing all winter until now, and I have also read a great deal, for indirectly that is very necessary to me. On the whole, I can say I've made progress, but I ought to be able to get along more quickly. The principal motive for writing you now is to ask you if you know of any reason why I should not go to see Mr. Tierstig and Mauve. I think it would be to my advantage to go to The Hague for a time. But if I knew for certain that Mr. Teerstig would rather I did not go there, it might make me change my mind. What do you think about it? I've seen little of Van Rappard because Van Rappard sort of comes up when he paints, I think, the potato eaters. Again, anyway, he says, because it seemed to me that he did not like to be disturbed. Remember, he described Van Rappard as this rich guy and intelligent and a respectable artist. Then he says, as long as I'm not more advanced, I must avoid young artists who do not always reflect on what they do or say. And yet I long very much to find one who, being more advanced than I, could help me progress. So he's kind of saying how he misses, he wishes he could have a contemporary. He wishes he could find a friend who's an artist. And I think the way he feels here in 1881 is the way he felt his entire life going forward for the next 16, 17 years. He wanted to share his journey with another artist of a similar age, kind of thing. And he would sort of find that for a very short time with Gogh. But you must remember, he already feels this now. So you can remember how desperately he wanted Gogh to visit him when he said he would, and then the months still rolled by and he didn't arrive. You can also imagine the devastation of Gogh kind of leaving him after he'd been waiting for him for such a long time. But anyway, this is what he feels like in 1881, January 1881. You know, I really want to meet a young artist that knows what he's talking about. He's kind of looking for a guide. He's kind of looking for a friend. What do they call them? Partner in crime, in a sense. Not that it's crime, but you know what I mean? A partner in the same thing that they're trying to achieve. Then he says, well, tell me if you see any insurmountable obstacle to my going to The Hague for a while, and if perhaps you know any other course in case I'm prevented from going there. I shake hands, awaiting a somewhat quicker reply. Vincent. That's January 1881. Now we go to the 14th of February, 1882. That's weird. I think that's just the wrong date. It's 14th February, 1881. This is a letter from his father, from Vincent's father to Theo. Obviously talking about Vincent. This is Valentine's Day, 1881. Reverend Van Gogh to Theo. It seems as if the melancholy mood caused by our worries about Vincent has much diminished since we heard that good news about your promotion. It is very kind of you that you are willing to assist us a little in those expenses for Vincent. So Vincent obviously knows his brother's gotten a promotion, and the fact that his brother's gotten a promotion is good news for him. Means there's more money for Theo, means more money for Vincent. There's more money for Theo means he's less of a burden on his parents, right? And so he recognizes that. His parents also recognize that. He says, I can assure you that it will not be a negligible relief to us, for the months fly by, and every time the necessary sum has to be available. I sent him 40 guilders in the beginning of January, 20 guilders on 22nd January, 35 guilders on 7th February. Yet it should not get you into any troubles yourself. For the moment he is cared for, but in the beginning of March he will need something again. Does it suit you to take care of it already then, or shall I do it? Tell me frankly. So this is a letter about money. It's about how much money Vincent's costing them. And he actually tells, he says 40 guilders in January, 20 on the 22nd of January, 35 on the 7th of February, right? And so everyone's sending him money, kind of thing. And Vincent's previous letters to say, I'm not writing to you to ask for money, but he kind of is. That's why I say there's this sneaky side to Vincent. It's not like he's a criminal, but he's definitely being a little bit weaselly in a way. Now he writes to his parents. This is from Vincent to his parents from Brussels, 16th February, 1881. Remember, at the end of all this, He will leave Brussels, which is quite expensive. He will leave the hotel that he's staying in, which is quite expensive, and he will move home. Why do you think that is? Well, it's to save the family money, right? So that it costs less. Obviously, not staying in a hotel and staying at home costs less. Okay, dear father and mother, I received your letter, which made me very happy, as I was already looking forward to it, especially because of father's illness. I was glad to hear that there is some improvement. I'm getting on pretty well with my work, though it is far from perfect and must become much better still. In the studio of that painter, I found a very good reproduction of a skeleton. As those things are rather difficult to get, I asked him if he would lend it to me for a few days to copy. At first, he raised some objection, probably because he thought I could not do it or that it would take me too long. But I insisted on having it, and he consented. That happened last Sunday afternoon, and as soon as I came home, I began it. It was finished Monday night. And to his surprise, I brought it back to him on Tuesday morning. So he's kind of pitching to his family that he's working hard, he's working fast. And that's something that we've always known about him, was that he's not that he's a quick study, but that he can render art really, really quickly, right? That was something that actually perturbed Gogh. He was like, why do you have to do this so quickly at like one sitting? Why the rush? And it seems like because he's always trying to convince his family that he was doing work, that he was worth investing in. Look, I finished this, I'm doing that, I'm working on that. It feels like he's got to convince them that he's working hard and that he's producing something. Then he says, he thought my drawing good, and indeed it is not so bad after all. I shall profit more from his instruction if only he has time to spare. On some points, especially perspective, he's very well informed, and I at least can learn a great deal from him. Now I must tell you another thing that I've done. As I told you, about a month ago, I bought a pair of trousers and a coat secondhand. Now, where do you think this is going? Where he talks about this other thing. So first of all, he said, I'm working really hard and I painted the skeleton really, really quickly, or I sketched it very quickly. Now he's talking about a second-hand pair of trousers and coat. Where do you think this is going? What do you think he's going to be asking for? Bridget says he does insist on things. Very persuasive. Reminding his brother to show manners. Giving Theo not so subtle hints. Yep. Okay, so he says, as I told you, about a month ago, I bought a pair of trousers and a coat second hand. It turned out so well that I bought another coat and pair of trousers from the same man. It's true that the first suit would have been quite sufficient, but it is much better to have two suits because they last longer when one can alternate them. So remember, he was this tramp-like figure who, I mean, in the Borinage, he gave away his clothes and slept on the floor. Now he needs clothes. And now he's not just bought one suit, but two. But he said, don't worry, it's secondhand. And he says, enclosed is a sample of the material. And I also had to replenish my underwear with 3 pairs of drawers and paid £2.75 a piece for them. So now he's giving the price for his underwear. I bought a pair of shoes for 4 francs. The things I bought were really not superfluous. In other words, it wasn't excessive. But altogether, they've made a big hole in this month's money. And I shall have to stint myself in consequence, especially as I paid 5 francs to that painter in advance for the lessons. So he starts off with a paragraph about how hard he's working and how quickly he worked. That is followed very quickly with, I bought 2 suits and shoes and this and that and the next thing. Then he says, do not worry about these expenses and do not accuse me of extravagance, for really the contrary is rather my fault of character. So he's saying, I've spent a lot of money and I don't have any money, but don't accuse me of spending a lot of money and don't hold that against me. In fact, send me some more money. He says, if I could spend more, I should get on quicker and make more progress. In other words, he's saying, if you send me money, I'm going to be independent a lot sooner. If you send me money, I'm going to be able to improve as an artist and I'll be independent in a, they say in Afrikaans, a japtrap, in a, what's it, a lickety split kind of thing. Never going to happen, but that's his argument. He says, if you can send me something extra this month without depriving yourselves, I hope you will. But if you cannot, there's no immediate hurry. I told my landlord that I should be rather hard up this month, and he agreed that I could pay at my convenience because he now knows me well enough not to demand my paying in advance, at least not the full month. So he's bought all of these things, but he can't really pay his landlord. Dad, can you pay them? Theo, can you help out? Kind of thing. I bought that suit for a reason other than wearing it myself as long as possible. When I can wear it no longer, it will serve me in another way. For you should know that eventually I must have a small collection of workman's clothes in which to dress the models for my drawings. Sorry, it's just ridiculous. So now he's kind of saying, I need a suit for myself. I need another suit for myself. I also need to give clothing to my models. And so in other words, now he needs a whole wardrobe for his models. But don't worry, I'm not spending a lot of money, right? So, can you see how he's trying to paint a certain kind of picture with words, saying, I'm not being extravagant and it's not a lot of money, but actually it is, right? He's demanding a lot. He definitely is demanding a lot. Then he says, for instance, the Brabant blue smock, the grey linen suit that the miners wear and their leather hat, then a straw hat and wooden shoes, a fisherman's outfit of yellow oilskin and a southwester, and certainly also that suit of black or brown corduroy, which is very, very picturesque and characteristic, and then a red flannel shirt or undervest, and also a few women's dresses, for instance, that of De Kempen and from the neighborhood of Antwerp, along with the Brabant bonnet, and for instance that of Blankenberg, just kind of like, I'm going to need this and that and the next thing. I'm going to need all of this clothing to dress my models. He says, I certainly do not intend to buy all this at once, but to collect it gradually, piece by piece, when I have a chance. So can you see how the pendulum has swung? He's gone from being this dude who's given away his clothes, where his brother actually had to give him clothing, in the Borinage, who slept on the floor where he's dirty. Now suddenly he's like a fashion house. He needs everything. He needs a whole wardrobe, right? He says, as those clothes can be bought secondhand, they are not at all difficult to get. I shall only be able to manage this well when I have some kind of studio of my own. So now that's also what he wants. He says, drawing the model with the necessary costumes is the only way to succeed. So you can see he's now really not fixated, but he's really got the idea of models front and center in his universe. And I think he wants to be seen by the models as a credible artist. In other words, he wants a sort of setup where if a model steps in there, she's like, oh, okay, you're an artist. Okay, I'll take off my clothes, or I'll wear this hat, or whatever it is. In other words, he wants to be seen as legitimate, professional, an actual artist kind of thing. But he suddenly feels like he needs a lot of money to bring this about. He says, only if I study drawing thus seriously and thoroughly, always trying to portray truly what I see, shall I arrive, and then notwithstanding the inevitable expenses, I shall make a living by it. For a good draftsman can certainly find work nowadays. Such persons are in great demand, and there are positions that are very well paid. Well, it sounds very convincing. It sounds very good. Ultimately, he's going to be needing money day after day, week after week, year after year for the next 16 years. And his long-suffering family are going to be footing the bill for that. But this is how it starts. So he says, so the thing is to try and become as skilled as possible. In Paris, many a draftsman earns from 10 to 15 francs a day, and in London and elsewhere the same and even more. But one does not reach this at once, and I am not so advanced as yet. But I may become so if I have some luck and can renew relations with persons like Mr. Tierstig and Theo and others, especially with good painters and draftsmen. But I must work and study very hard. That is the condition. You will not be surprised when I tell you that I'm eager to hear what Theo's proposition might be, or to hear something from Mr. Tierstig. From one way or the other, before the month of March, I must know what I can expect and how and where I shall be able to work during the spring and summer. And if I should, this whole letter is really about money. It says, if I should gradually succeed in earning something, that would not be unpleasant at all, though the principal thing is that I made progress and that my drawing becomes stronger, then everything will come right sooner or later. Maybe not. Models are expensive, at least relatively expensive, and if I had money enough to have them often, I should be able to work much better. But then a studio becomes indispensable, and people like Mr. Tierstick, Theo, and others know that quite well. Well, I must wait until they write me what they think, and meanwhile do what I can. I made another drawing of miners in the snow, which is somewhat better than last winter's. There's more character and effect in it. I'm also collecting wood engravings again, like those albums that Theo and Wilhelmine once had, for I can more or less complete the collection. They will be of use to me, as it is quite possible that I shall work from wood engraving sometime. I must tell you that those clothes I bought are well cut and look better on me than any others that I can remember. I tell you this because you might think they were something unusual or showy. This material is often worn in studios especially. And now I finish with greetings to all and my best wishes for Anna's birthday, and believe me, your loving Vincent. Do you notice how he signs off to his parents compared to his brother at the moment? To his parents, it's your loving Vincent. Then he also says, the painter who gives me lessons now is making a very good picture of a Blankenberg fisherman. Okay, so that's February, mid-February. And now there's nothing in March. And now we jump to the 2nd of April. Letter from Vincent to Theo, still in Brussels. Dear Theo, in reply to your 2 good letters, and as a result of Father's visit for which I'd been longing for some time, I have a few things to tell you. In the first place, this. I hear from Father that without my knowing it, you have been sending me money for a long time, in this way effectively helping me get on. Accept my heartfelt thanks. I firmly believe that you will not regret it. In this way, I'm learning a handicraft, and though it certainly will not make me rich, I will at any rate earn my 100 francs a month, which is the least one needs to live on, as soon as I become a better draftsman and get some regular work. So it's kind of promising his brother that he will eventually earn 100 francs a month. He says, what you told us about the painter Heyerdahl has greatly interested Van Rappard as well as me. Heyerdahl is a Norwegian painter temporarily in Paris in Bonnat's studio. As the former undoubtedly will write you about it himself, I speak about this question only insofar it concerns me personally, more or less. I find much truth in your remarks about the Dutch artists, that it is very doubtful if one could get away from them any clear counsel on the difficulties of perspective, etc., with which I'm struggling. So he says, I'm struggling with perspective. I think that is just inevitable given the bleakness of his subject matter. His subject matter is very claustrophobic, very dark. There's not much perspective in that kind of oppressive theme. He goes on to say, at least I quite agree with you that someone like Heyerdahl would be far preferable to many others who do not possess the ability to explain their method and to provide the necessary guidance and teaching. You speak of Heyerdahl as one who takes great pains to seek proportions for drawing. That is just what I need. Many a good painter has not the slightest or hardly any idea of what proportions for drawing are, or beautiful lines, or characteristic composition, and thought and poetry. Yet these are important questions. And then he names a couple of artists that take this extremely seriously and never lose sight of. I think I'm going to eat a pizza in about half an hour, a pineapple and ham pizza. Many a Dutch painter would understand nothing, absolutely nothing of the beautiful work of Millet, blah, 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 blah. So he goes on and on. Then he says, in the meantime, what must I do? Hold on, what does he say here? I will not insist on carrying out my plan of going to Holland, at least not if I have the prospect of going to Paris later and can more or less count on it. So it looks like he wants Theo to put him in touch with this Norwegian artist Heyerdahl that knows perspective, but remember, he's also in Paris. Then he says, in the meantime, what must I do? What do you think would be best? I can continue to work with Rappard for a few weeks, but then he will probably leave here. My bedroom is too small and the light is not good, and the people would object to my partly shutting out the light from the window. I'm not even allowed to put my etchings or my drawings up on the wall. So when Rappard leaves in May, I shall have to move. I should like to work a while in the country. Then he names a couple of places. So he is realizing now that he's going to have to leave Belgium. He mentions a couple of places: Heist, Kalmhout, Etten, Scheveningen, Katwijk, any place, even nearer here, as Schaerbeek, Haren, Groenendaal, but preferably a place where there's a chance of coming into contact with other painters, and if possible, of living and working together, because it is cheaper and better. Well, not much chance of that, Vincent. You're going to have to go home to dad and mom and sisters and younger brother. He says, wherever it may be, living expenses are always at least 100 francs a month. If one has less, it means want, either physical or of the necessary material and tools. This winter I've spent, let us say, 100 francs a month, though in reality it has scarcely been as much. And I spent a great deal of that on drawing materials and also got myself some clothes. I bought 2 workman's suits of rough black velvet, of that material known as veloutine. I think that's velvet, yeah. It looks well and one can wear it everywhere. Besides, the suits will be of use to me later. So I don't know if you had to see Vincent van Gogh walking around the way he was then now in a velvet suit. I wonder what that would look like. He says, for my models, of course, I need clothes like everybody else. Gradually, I must make such a collection of all kinds of garments, second-hand if necessary, men's as well as women's. But of course, I need not do it all at once, though I've started and I'm going on with it. It's quite interesting that he's trying to get hold of women's clothing. It's also interesting that it's actually quite early in his art journey that is really quite fixated on drawing models and getting clothing for them. Then he says, what you say is true. Financial questions have either advanced or handicapped many people in the world. It is so, and Bernard Palissy's saying remains true. Poverty prevents the good spirits from arriving. But when I think it over, I cannot help wondering, isn't it right that in a family like ours, in which 2 Monsieurs van Gogh are very rich, and both in the art field, Uncle Cord and our uncle of Prinsenhage, and in which you and I of the younger generation have chosen the same line, though in different spheres, isn't it right, I wonder, that this being so, I should be able to count in some way on 100 francs a month during the time which must necessarily elapse before I can get regular work as a draftsman. So here he's really taking the complete opposite track to what he did a couple of months earlier. Now he's really demanding that he be given basically 100 francs a month, because he says there are at least 2 members of the Van Gogh family that are rich and that can afford it, right? Do you remember that he was saying that being poor is awesome, and like he was just in a totally different place where money isn't important and poverty's this incredible thing. And now suddenly he feels like, wow, our family is rich, I should be given a lot of money, kind of thing. They can afford it, right? If I think about my past and my upbringing and so on, I'm from quite a wealthy family, and my father's like a property developer, and I didn't think it would be a problem studying at university. Like, I didn't think that was going to be kind of an issue, but it kind of was. although my studies were paid for, I kind of was not threatened, but I was sort of under the impression that the plug was going to be pulled at any moment. And I think that was the whole reason for that was like your studies aren't guaranteed. So how can I put it? Because I'm paying for your studies, it doesn't mean you can just relax. You need to work hard, kind of thing. And so there was kind of this implied thing of it might not be paid for. And often when I studied for the next semester, although it was paid for, it was paid late or at the last second. And there wasn't like a sense of, don't worry, it's taken care of. It was worry, it may not be taken care of, right? Yeah, Stephanie says he's quite entitled now. Bridget says that would be an added pressure, Nick, the not knowing. So no, definitely was. And I remember talking to someone once and kind of complaining about it and just saying that how difficult it was, how it was difficult to focus on your studies when you didn't know whether it was even going to be paid for. And I was told, this wasn't by a family member, it was by someone else. I was told how ungrateful I was. It was like, wow, you know, you were so lucky to actually have your varsity studies paid for. You're so ungrateful. And I said, no, I am grateful it was paid for, but if I'd been assured that it would be paid, then I wouldn't have had to worry about that. And yeah, so, you know, that's kind of just a separate story. That concern, so on the one hand you feel entitled to it, but on the other hand there's this ongoing kind of threat of and it's done in a very weird way. Like I said, was paid, but it was often paid at the last moment, or it was paid late, or you had to ask over and over and over again, kind of thing. But it's a time I'm really glad that I'm not in anymore, that's for sure. To give an idea of the reality of my life then was the fuel light in my car was always on. So I didn't live very far from my university, maybe 2-3 miles, maybe a little bit more, but you know, maybe less than 5 miles, put it that way. But the fuel reserve light of my car, I would say, was on 90% of my university career. And somehow I mastered every drop of alcohol. I mastered every drop of fuel that went into my car. And amazingly, only once did I run out of fuel. And that was like couple of meters from a gas station where when the fuel ran out, I sort of could still taxi into the gas station because the car was still moving. So although I studied for years and the fuel light was like permanently on, I knew my car so well that I could get it right to the last drop, you know, which is a pretty exacting science. Yvonne says, my parents refused to pay for my education even though they could have. Now that's that I think that's quite hard. That's also quite hard to kind of rationalize. I got a joke on WhatsApp where it says, how does it go? How does that saying go about, I've got a little light, I'm going to let it shine. How does that thing go? This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine, right? And that was a picture of the fuel on light. I thought that was pretty funny. I've got a little light, this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine, reserve fuel light. Yvonne says, I only made it through my sophomore year of college. I couldn't afford it anymore. I just went to work at that point. Sorry to hear that, Yvonne. And it is something that is quite hard to understand. Patty says, I'm sure you were an excellent student, Nick. Okay, I'll leave that for another thing. So yeah, he is feeling really entitled and really demanding. Then he says, now 3 years ago I quarreled with CM, I'm not quite sure who that is, about quite a different question, but is that any reason for CM to remain my enemy forever? Who could CM be? I would much rather think that he had never been my enemy and considered it a misunderstanding. Maybe I can find the answer here. Just see if we can find out who the CM is. CM, who are you? CM. CM is Cornelis Marinus van Gogh. So just another uncle. I think it's the brother of his father, and he was a bookseller in Amsterdam. So he obviously argued with that guy, with that relative. He says, I would gladly take all the blame rather than argue about how much was really my fault, for I have no time for such things. Uncle Corso often helps other draftsmen. Would it be so unnatural now if someday when I needed it, he showed me his goodwill? However, I do not say this to get financial help from him. He could help me in quite another way than by giving money. Somebody asked me in a comment like, like if Vincent's father was a pastor, how on earth could he have money? Like where would he get money? And I think this sort of answers it, where he says he's from quite a wealthy family. There are wealthy uncles and whatnot in his family. That's not to say that, I think it's true to say that Theo and Vincent kind of struggled financially their entire lives, but that's different from saying they were poor. They struggled, but they nevertheless kind of got along. They kind of made some kind of living. Despite struggling, they kind of made some kind of living. If Vincent had absolutely no money, wouldn't have been able to afford, or his family, if they had absolutely no money, if they were like on the poverty line, or if they just were really struggling, there's no way he would have been able to afford paints and canvases and whatnot for the next 16 years. Just wouldn't have been possible. But the fact is, they were fairly well off. They were wealthy family members, and Theo had quite a good job as well. So I hope that addresses that. Then he says he could help me in quite another way than by giving money. For instance, if it were possible, he might bring me into contact with persons with whom I could learn many things, or help me get regular work from some magazine. So it's quite demanding. He's kind of expecting a lot from virtually everybody. He's like basically saying, help me, you should help me. Can you all just help me? I need you to do this, I need you to do that. He says, this is the way I express myself to Father. I noticed that people talked about the strange and unaccountable fact that I was so hard up, although I belonged to such and such a family. I replied that I thought it was only temporary and would come right after a time. Still, I thought it better to talk it over with Father and you, and I wrote something about it to Mr. Tierstig. But he seems to have misunderstood my intention, as he got the impression that I planned to live on the bounty of my uncles. This being his opinion, he wrote me a very discouraging letter and said I had no right to do such a thing. I certainly do not pretend to have the right, but I want to prevent this affair from ever becoming the subject of gossip in the studios. So this is really early on. This is April 1881. And he's saying that someone has said, you plan to live on the bounty of your uncles. Well, in a weird way, that was actually true. Not that he planned to do it, but effectively he did end up living on the bounty of his family. That is the reality of what happened. Anyway, he says, therefore, I think that it is necessary for good relations between myself and the family to be reestablished, at any rate provisionally and outwardly, in expectation of their changing their minds about me. If they are unwilling, but then he says, Kuso, I'm not quite sure what that means. Let me quickly Google it. If they're unwilling, probably means so be it. Let's have a look. What is the meaning of... used to say that one thinks that something is true. Not really getting the full meaning here. Kiso. Yeah, I'm not quite sure what it means, even though I'm Googling it. Whichever way I turned. Is that what it means? Whichever. No matter which. So he says, if they are unwilling, no matter whichever, then I would not be able to prevent gossip here and there. Were I immediately to write to see him, I think that's Cornelius Martinez, or go to see his honor, it is to be feared he would not read my letter or would receive me too uncordially. So he's trying to network, he's trying to find ways of earning money, he's trying to navigate the feelings of caution and resistance that he's getting from family members. He says, that's why I'm talking it over with Pa and yourself, and you might possibly drop a word occasionally so that he will not misunderstand my intentions. I was not hoping to get money from his honor, as Mr. Tearstick seemed to think, but only hoping that if he gained faith and confidence in my future after a talk with me, he might see me with new eyes. And if he did, it stands to reason that I most certainly would not scorn his help. And in that case, he might smooth the way for me by means other than by giving me money, for instance, in the interval between now and my going to Paris. Now, I've got to say this. Whatever you may say about Vincent van Gogh, whatever you might say about him as an artist or a person or a lover or whatever, I think you've got to acknowledge that it's quite an achievement to unsuccessfully sell art for around about 16, 17 years and nevertheless still get support, financial support for that time. And I think that says something about him being a persuasive and to some extent it's not just being persuasive, but also what's the word? A person that can kind of stand up for himself, but who's also to some extent worthy of that support, even if he doesn't actually sell anything. In other words, there's sincerity in his efforts. He does work very hard, right? So I think it's quite an achievement that he manages to get financial support for 16, 17 years, even though is basically a failure for that length of time. How many people do you know who would give you money and keep providing you with materials without anything to show for it for almost 20 years? It's quite amazing in its own, on its own. Ricardo Ortiz was wondering how many languages you speak. I can speak English and Afrikaans. I know a little bit of South Korean, so if someone's speaking, I know a fair bit. I can't really speak South Korean. I did study South Korean language for a little while. I know a little bit of Sotho, the Sotho language as well, but basically just two languages. I know a little bit about South Korean as well. If you know Afrikaans, you can kind of like go to the Netherlands and understand about 40-50% of what they're saying, and if you go to Germany, you'd maybe know 30%. So it does kind of translate in that way. Stephanie says you read a letter in Dutch before. I can do it again. It's just not. It doesn't really kind of come naturally to me. I mean, it is a little bit different. Then he says, I wrote back that I was not at all astonished at this misconstruing my letter. I don't know if I'm going to go through all of this. This is a really long letter. It goes on and on and on. It was basically unhappy about what his uncle thinks about him and money and this and that and the next thing. He also talks about a mannequin. What does he say here? Yeah, this is a really, really long letter. So I'm not going to read the end or the rest of this letter. I want to get to the middle of the year at least. We're already at 3 hours. I need to eat and retire from this episode. Now we go to the 12th of April. Let's see how far we can go. 12th of April, 30th of April, and then May. I think we'll go up until May. Okay, so about 3 more letters. So this is a letter from Vincent to Theo, 12th of April, still from Brussels. Not a long letter. Dear Theo, as I heard from Father that there's a chance of your being in Etten next Sunday, and that it would be well for me to be there. Also, I start thither today. So I hope to meet you soon, and I'm looking forward to it very much, particularly because I've sketched 2 drawings at Rapards, the lamp bearers and the bearers of the burden, and should like to consult you about how to go on with them. I must somehow have the necessary models to finish them, and then I trust the result will be good. That is, I shall have a few compositions to show to Smeet and Tilly or to the editors of La Illustration or the like. So I leave today and I'm letting you know so that you will not look for me in Brussels. I should like to make a few sketches of the heaths at Etten, which is why I'm starting a few days earlier. So I hope to meet you soon and now shake hands with you in thought. Yours truly, Vincent. Then he says, I'm sending you 3 krabbelingen, which is scrawls, which are clumsy as yet, but from which you will see, I hope, that I'm gradually improving. You should take into account that this is only a short time since I started drawing, although I made little sketches when I was a boy, and that during this winter, I thought it most important to make rigidly accurate anatomical studies, not my own compositions. Next letter, 30th of April, 1881. This is from Vincent to Theo, and now he's in Etten, now he's at home. Dear Theo, my best wishes for your birthday. I often think of your visit. I'm glad that we saw each other again and hope you will come back this summer. I've been here a few days now and it is splendid outdoors, but the weather does not yet permit drawing in the open air every day. So it's sort of early summer, or let's say spring, still springtime in the Netherlands. I've visited the Netherlands in fact, I think I arrived the last day of April, and it was definitely quite brisk. It was definitely quite cool. Anyway, so he says, meanwhile, I've started on the Malay. The Semir is finished. So I'll show you what he drew here. It's I guess it's okay. It's not great. It's okay. I think the picture's okay, but the face, which is perhaps arguably the most important aspect, is executed really badly. S.M. Kovalinsky says, magical how his letters are being read by Nick, reverberating through the centuries. It kind of is. It's like moving through time, isn't it? Then he says, as you know, there was an exhibition of watercolors in Brussels. It was rather interesting. Among the Dutch, there were 4 or 5 more. So bear in mind the fact that he's got a famous relative who's kind of kicking ass and taking names is another reason why he would feel I can do this too. In fact, my own famous great-grandfather, I mean, he's very famous in South Africa, made me think maybe I've got a talent in photography. Maybe I, in a creative sense, maybe I can do something because he could. Because he'd done something that's kind of unconventional, I thought maybe I can. Maybe I've got that same je ne sais quoi, whatever. And so when you do have a famous relative who's an artist, it gives he's kind of a pioneer. He's walked that road and he's shown it's possible. Yvonne, do you have a family member who's like a well-known artist? Is that somebody who inspired you? Something that's quite interesting is when I turn on my car, on the map of my car, my great-grandfather's name comes up because a street has been named after him, and it's sort of not that far from where I stay. But it's always kind of quite a nice thing to see. I don't know how many people can actually say that a relative's name, a street is named after one of their relatives. It's quite a nice feeling, I guess. Anyway, he goes on to say, then there was a mesdag that kept one from looking at any other drawing, at least it did for me. The beach at twilight, stormy weather, the sky with grey clouds, and the ruddy glow of the setting sun. It's been quite a while since he's spoken, like poetically of the landscape. It's been quite a long time since he's done that. Now he's doing it. In the foreground, a fisherman on horseback, a tall, strange, dark silhouette standing out against the white, foaming waves. This figure speaking with people aboard a fishing smack. I guess it's a kind of boat that is riding on the waves in the middle distance. On deck, some people are busy with a lantern, and they are talking to the man on horseback, apparently about the anchor which he must come and take ashore. It is a large, important drawing, done broadly and so vigorous that, as I told you, nothing else can really be compared to it. There were 2 drawings by Termeulen which struck me as well, Sheep in the Dunes and Sheep in the Snow. He is progressing well. If I remember correctly, I saw that man at Buckhazen's studio, drudging and plodding along, and yet he has arrived now. At least these 2 drawings were excellent. Then there were drawings by Menier, peasant boy in a barn, refined in color and tone, and also in conception, reminding one of Malay, for instance, in its simplicity and faithfulness to nature, also a stoker and a factory hand. You can see the subject matter that is appealing to him is very kind of colloquial. It's very, in a sense, ordinary. It's the plight of the worker. It's the plight of the blue-collar man or individual. it's the human condition in a simple sense. There were several drawings by, now you've got to also say that for all his earnestness, all his sincerity, well, it all came to fruition, because look at the artwork that just sold 2 weeks ago in Christie's, New York. You know, whether he painted it in or outside Arles, France, 150 years ago, it found its way to New York and has just sold for $51 million. So all of that ardent soul searching to try and find this theme, this human theme, appears to have worked. I think another more cynical interpretation is, you could say, well, it's all rubbish. Art is rubbish, and someone just decides what isn't rubbish and what is, right? If you look at some of those artworks, some of it's just lines, some of it is just a mess of paint blotches and color, right? So who's to say what is art? The fact that Van Gogh had this art history and art knowledge and art culture means something, but when you look at some of the other art that's there, like the one of Marilyn Monroe, what does that tell you? And I think a lot of what it does tell you is, it's not so much whether it's true or not, it's just that the narrative that surrounds it, is it compelling or not? Which I think is a little bit sad. I would like to think that art is authentic, but I think the art world is quite fickle, and the art world is quite, to some extent, fake. It's manufactured. Rapard, to go back to the letter, Rapard is going to Holland in 3 weeks, and this summer he will probably work in the country, then perhaps go to Paris next winter. But right now it looks as though he's not going to stay there. I think he got a cold shower there at one time, but there's no reason why he shouldn't be more fortunate next time. It certainly is true that he's made great progress since then. I'm very glad things have been arranged so that I shall be able to work here quietly for a while. So after all these long letters, all these appeals, he's at last sort of in a place that's quite settled. The family are going to look after him. He's staying at home, and, you know, I guess he's fairly happy with that. Obviously, it's not going to end very well. His dad's going to want to kick him out the house and disown him, but this is where he is at this point. I hope to make as many studies as I can, for that is the seed which must later produce the drawings. Write to me now and then, and if possible, keep me informed of the things that strike you. And if you should hear of a vacancy for a draftsman, think of me. And now it is mail time. I will let you know what I'm doing, and I hope you'll occasionally advise me on what subjects to choose for drawing. Sometimes it will be of use to me, sometimes perhaps not, but tell me what you think. I will do the same for you. And then on both sides, we must try to sift the chaff from the grain. Adieu, a handshake in thought, Vincent. At this point, Vincent van Gogh is 28 years old. So he's back at home, kind of starting again as an artist. And so this is the last letter I'm going to read today. It's written from Etten, and it's from Vincent to Theo, and it's not a very long letter. I'm just going to show you the pictures that he draws of a hut. It's not too bad. Obviously, it's difficult to make out what is going on because it's black and white, but doesn't seem terrible. And then he's got barn with a moss-grown roof. I quite like this one. I quite like this one. This is not bad for an artist that's just starting out. So what do you guys think of this one? Yvonne says, my dad is not an artist but a writer, famous only locally in our home state. That's cool. Ricardo asks Yvonne, are you from Indiana? Stephanie says, a writer's craft is a work of art. What is written on a blank canvas, just a different medium. Thanks, Stephanie. That's nice to hear. Sift the chaff from the grain. I learned that from conversation with you, Nick. Yeah, it's basically separate the chaff from the grain, the seed from the straw, kind of thing. And then there's this one, which I also think is pretty cool. Again, it's quite hard to make out without the color, but I think it's I quite like the perspective. I quite like the whole theme. And, if you look at this and you imagine what reality had to look like, it must have been quite awesome. Okay, so let's wrap up with this letter. He says, Dear Theo, I enclose a little note, because the others are writing to you, and I thought you would like to hear what I'm actually doing. Every day that it does not rain, I go out in the fields, generally to the heath. I make my studies on a rather large scale, like the few you saw at the time of your visit. So I've done, among other things, a cottage on the heath, and also that barn with a thatched roof on the road to Roosendaal, which locally they call the Protestant barn. You'll perhaps remember what I mean. Then the mill right opposite it. Wow, it's suddenly gotten cold. Suddenly gotten quite cold. Then he says, then the mill right opposite it, in the meadow, and the elm trees in the churchyard, and another of woodcutters busy on a wide patch of ground where a large pine tree has been cut down. I also try to draw the implements, such as a wagon, plow, harrow, wheelbarrow, etc. Now you can see why, in a way, this is the perfect setting for Van Gogh. He loves this sort of rural, pastoral setting, the village life kind of thing. Think about when last you saw somebody chopping down a tree with an axe. When last did you see a woodcutter in your life? Or have you ever seen a woodcutter? And he sees this sort of thing on a daily basis. Woodcutters, people plowing with actual, I guess, hand plows or whatever. And, these really old windmills, well, they're old today. Do you know what the windmills were really used for in the Netherlands? Actually, if water was running into a particular plot of land, it would actually reverse the flow of the water. In other words, to push the streams, the flow of streams in the opposite direction, and thus reclaim a certain amount of land. That is in a large part what these windmills were tasked with doing, is reversing the flow of ordinary distribution networks, tributaries and whatnot. Then he says, the one with the woodcutters turned out best of all, and I think you would like it. I've had a letter from Rappard. Perhaps he will come here sometime this summer. A handshake in thought, and believe me, yours sincerely, Vincent. Okay, and so that brings us to the middle of the year, of the year 1881. That's quite an important year, which is why I don't want to sort of rush through it. But bear in mind, all of this is going to take us into Vincent falling in love and creating drama and crisis at home. And that's going to make his life a lot more difficult. And of course, when he lives with his brother, when he moves to Paris, what does he do? He brings the drama and crisis with him as well. I think it's important to say that his relationship with his brother is one both of form and function. He's both got on good terms with his brother, but he's also to some extent aware that his brother works in the art industry, which he did himself, and is potentially going to be of some use for him further down the line, but also that he needs financial aid from his brother as well. The flip side to that is that Vincent first worked at Gogh and advised and supported his younger brother when his brother was new at it. So he gave his brother advice, and also I also think they both interested in art. They both know the same kind of industry, and so that is something that they have in common, and means they've got something to talk about and think about and share. And maybe some of what Vincent van Gogh sees and experiences is of some use to Theo in his work, and vice versa. So, it's just important to stress that his relationship with Theo isn't purely altruistic. It's not purely, I love my brother, so I love writing letters to him. It's to some extent functional. It's to some extent the fact that it's centered on art. So many of the conversations are about art and artists is why it stands the test of time. Does that make sense? Okay, I'm not going to take it further than that. Stephanie says, I love windmills. I must say, Stephanie, when I was in The Hague, I got horribly lost. And it was a windmill that helped me find my way, because when I was there, one of the things that I did with a friend that I knew there, they took me to see this windmill, which was quite close to where their house was. And so when I got horribly lost, I somehow found my way to this windmill, and I was like, wow, this was after being lost for like hours. When I kind of stumbled on this windmill, I was like, wow, I have no idea where I am, but this I know is really not far from the house that I need to go to. And so I although I stumbled on this windmill, I kind of cycled out in different directions from it. If I thought this doesn't feel right, I would just come back. So windmill helped me find my way in The Hague, which is quite funny. It was a landmark for me. Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't see more of them. I was a little bit of a nightmare when we drove back from, I think it was, anyway, when we were driving back from somewhere, was it, let's see if I can remember the place's name. Was it Utrecht? No, it wasn't Utrecht. It was somewhere along the coast. Yeah, I just can't think of the place now. Anyway, it was a really nice fishing village. On our way back from there, we'd sometimes see these beautiful windmills right off the highway. So like you're driving on this like 3-lane highway, and then there's a windmill, and I was like, can we go off the road? I want to go and see that windmill. And they'd be like, no, we're not. There's another one. Can we stop? Can we? No. So I didn't see too many windmills up close, but that one certainly did help. Ricardo says, thank you, everyone. I have to bow out, going to 8:15 class. Everyone very interesting. I think even Timmy knows that the show's just about over. Sorry about the technical glitches. I really don't know what that was about. Really don't know. Just went off and then came back on. Just a big thank you to the mods. Stephanie, I don't know what happened to Bria. I think Bria left us when the connection broke, but thanks for joining us. I'm glad I made it back. Also glad you made it back. And thanks to the members. Also a couple of new members like, what's his surname? Coyote. But SMK Walensky, Bridget, Ricarda, Paddy. I'm just trying to see where that new member is. Is his name Tom, or what was his name? Also, thank you for your super chats. Susan Ricarda, and I think there's another one. Anyway, and then let's go just finish off by looking at the votes. 95 of you voted, and the question was, when do you think he started going to brothels? 3% said never. That's a good low result, because it's actually zero. He definitely didn't go. He definitely went to brothels. 20%, so 1/5 of you say when he lived in Arles, and then 30% say when he was 28, and he clearly was in the brothel stage now, like in this time that he's staying with his parents. And you also got to ask yourself, now that he's back home, now that he's in Eton, how's he going to go to a brothel? Where's he going to go to a brothel? How's he going to sort of navigate that part of his life, because he's now at home? How's he going to satisfy that aspect, right? So anyway, the right answer was when he was around 22, so quite early on. One of the issues that people have had saying that Vincent didn't have neurosyphilis was that they said he didn't have syphilis for long enough. But if he contracted it quite early on, when he's 22 years old, I think that's more than enough time, sadly. Same actually applies to Theo as well. Theo, I think, also got neurosyphilis. You can go mad, you can go insane as a result of neurosyphilis. Neurosyphilis is the extreme, the advanced side of syphilis. Once again, it does call into question if things had worked out with Guy Voss, that this whole aspect of his life would not have been necessary, would not have happened. Tommy Coyote, you're in the right place. Okay. So that is it, guys. Thanks for being here. Stephanie says it wasn't one of the 7 from the article, though. Stephanie says, I learned something new. Paddy says, thanks to Nick and everyone. I'm not quite following. What do you mean it wasn't one of the 7 from the article? Not quite following there. Margaret Zabinski says, thanks for the live. Thanks for joining me. In the next live, we'll take it up from the middle of 1881 to the end of 1881. And then we want to start moving through these relationship catastrophes. It goes from Guy Voss to Sien Hoornik, that takes place the very next year, 1882. And then from there, the neighbor. So we want to start going through those catastrophes, and then from there, we want to go to Paris. Before that happens, Vincent van Gogh's father dies, I think that's 1885. So we'll probably start with Guy Voss. A lot of these letters are really long and lovelorn, though, so we'll see how that goes. Stephanie says that he visited brothels while he was pastoring. That surprised me. That just shows you that people can be more and less than what you think of them. People can be greater and lesser than what you imagine them to be. And I think this artwork of his that just sold is an example of him showing you what all of this, what appears to be nonsense and nothing going anywhere, where it ultimately takes him. $51 million for just one of his artworks while he was in a mental asylum. Quite amazing. Okay, guys, I see there's still 28 of you guys watching. If you are watching this after the fact, so if you're not part of the live chat and you maybe not a member either, but you're enjoying these episodes, they do take quite a long time to get through. This one's about 3.5 hours. So if you appreciate it and you want to say thank you, you can. you can use the thank you button, and please do use that if that's how you feel inclined. I feel a little bit like Van Gogh now, the way that he was asking his relatives for this, that, and the next thing. I feels a little bit like that in a way, but nevertheless. Stephanie, I hope you guys sleep well, and I'll see you guys for the next Van Gogh Letters Sunday. The next two videos I'm probably going to make for YouTube will be on Caitlin Armstrong. Some quite interesting news that has come through there. And then also Summer Wells. There's something else I've been meaning to talk about in terms of that on the 1 year anniversary. So look out for that on YouTube. Take care, guys. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you guys next time. Timmy? Okay, guys, see you.